The knife was already at her throat when Wren Ashford opened her eyes. Not a real knife. Something colder. A silence that had crept into her bedroom while she slept, wrapping itself around her chest until breathing felt like a decision she had to make on purpose. She lay still, heart hammering, and listened. The house was too quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after something has already gone wrong. She turned her head on the pillow. Damien's side of the bed was empty. The sheets were cold, which meant he had been gone for hours, not minutes. Wren sat up slowly and reached for the small wooden box on the nightstand, the one that never left her side, the one that held the only thing in this house that was truly hers. Her fingers found the lid. She lifted it. Empty. For a moment her mind refused to accept what her eyes were telling her. She lifted the box higher, tilted it toward the thin moonlight bleeding through the curtains, as if the Moonstone might simply be hiding in a corner she had missed. It was not hiding. It was gone. Wren was out of bed before she had decided to move, her bare feet silent on the cold floor, her whole body suddenly alert, in a way that felt older than fear. Some instinct buried deep in her blood, some inheritance from the wolf that lived beneath her skin, told her that this was not a small thing. This was not a missing hairpin or a misplaced ring. The Moonstone was the reason the royal pack had ever looked at her and called her Luna. Without it, she was only a woman who had married an alpha, not the woman the pack itself had chosen to follow. She pulled a robe over her shoulders and moved toward the door, and that was when she heard the voices. They were coming from the study at the end of the hall, low, careful, the kind of voices people use when they think no one is listening. Wren recognized one of them instantly. It was Damien's voice, quieter than she had ever heard it, almost pleading. She did not recognize the second voice at first, but something about it made the hair on her arms rise. It was smooth, confident, amused even, in a way that felt wrong for the middle of the night. She should have called out. She should have walked straight in and demanded to know what was happening in her own home, in the middle of the night, while she slept 50 feet away. Instead, some quieter, more careful part of her guided her forward on silent feet, until she stood just outside the study door, hidden by the shadow of the hallway, watching through the narrow gap where the door had not been fully closed. Damien stood behind his desk, his broad shoulders tense, his hands braced against the wood, as if he needed something solid to hold on to. Across from him stood a woman Wren had seen only twice before, always at a distance, always introduced with careful, polite words that told her nothing real. Genevieve Cole. Tall, elegant, dark-haired, with the kind of composure that made a room rearrange itself around her without her even trying. And in her open palm, catching the low lamplight, sat the Moonstone. Wren's breath caught in her throat. "You understand what this means," Damien was saying, and his voice was strained, almost apologetic, though Wren could not yet tell whom he was apologizing to. "If anyone finds out I gave this to you, even for one night, it will look like exactly what it is," Genevieve said, cutting him off, and there was no apology in her tone at all. She turned the stone over in her fingers, studying it the way a jeweler studies a diamond, before deciding its price. "You trust me. More than you trust her." "That is not what this is," Damien said quickly. "Isn't it?" Wren pressed her hand flat against the wall to steady herself. Her pulse was so loud in her own ears that she was almost afraid it would give her away. She wanted to burst through the door. She wanted to demand answers. But something held her frozen in place, some instinct that told her if she moved now, she would only see half of what was happening, and she needed to see all of it. "The threat is real," Damien said, and now his voice had shifted, taking on the low, urgent tone of a man trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. "There have been wolves scouting near the eastern border for 2 weeks. If they are working for the Draven Pack, and I believe they are, then the Moonstone cannot stay in an unprotected room. Wren does not know how to defend herself the way you do. You have training. You have instincts sharpened by war. For one night, it is safer with you." Genevieve smiled, and it was not a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who had already won something, and was simply waiting for the other person to notice. "For one night," she repeated softly, closing her fingers around the stone. "Of course, Damien. Whatever keeps the pack safe." Wren stepped back from the door so quickly that she nearly lost her balance. Her mind was spinning, trying and failing to make sense of what she had just witnessed. a threat on the border. Perhaps that part was even true. Damien was not a foolish man, and he did not frighten easily. But there had been something else beneath his words, something that had nothing to do with wolves at the border, and everything to do with the way his eyes had lingered on Genevieve's face a moment too long, the way his shoulders had softened in her presence, in a way they never softened around his own wife. Ren made it back to the bedroom before her legs gave out beneath her. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the empty wooden box on the nightstand, and for a long moment she simply could not breathe. She thought back to her mating ceremony, 6 months ago now, though it felt like a lifetime. She remembered standing before the entire royal pack in the ceremonial hall, the scent of pine and candle smoke thick in the air, hundreds of eyes fixed on her, as Damien lifted the Moonstone from its ancient case and placed it around her neck with his own hands. She remembered the way the pack had gone utterly silent, the way even the eldest wolves had bowed their heads, because the Moonstone did not simply mark a marriage, it marked a bond that the pack itself recognized, deep in the part of them that was more wolf than man. From that night forward, she had not merely been Damien's wife. She had been their Luna, chosen by blood and by magic older than memory. She had felt, in that moment, like she had finally found the place where she belonged. Now, she sat alone in a cold bedroom, staring at an empty box, and she felt something she had not let herself feel in months. Doubt. Not the small, forgivable doubt of a new marriage still finding its footing, but something deeper and colder, a doubt that reached all the way down to the foundation of who she was supposed to be in this pack. She did not sleep again that night. When dawn finally came, gray and reluctant through the curtains, Ren rose and dressed carefully, choosing a simple green dress that did nothing to hide the exhaustion in her eyes. She told herself she would confront him. She would walk into the kitchen, look him in the eyes, and ask him directly why her Moonstone had spent the night in another woman's hand. But when she found him at the breakfast table, his expression was so carefully calm, so practiced, that the words dried up in her throat. He looked up at her and smiled, and for one disorienting moment, it was the same smile he had given her on their mating night, warm and certain, the smile that had once made her believe every promise he had ever made her. "You look tired," he said, reaching for her hand across the table. "Bad dreams?" Ren looked down at his hand covering hers, and thought of Genevieve's fingers closing around the Moonstone in the lamplight. "Something like that," she said quietly. She did not mention what she had seen. Not yet. Some instinct, quiet but insistent, told her that if she confronted him too soon, without understanding the full shape of what was happening, she would only hand him the chance to explain it away with careful, half-true words, the way he had explained it to Genevieve the night before. She needed proof. She needed to understand exactly what was growing in the shadows of her own home before she tried to cut it down. So instead, she asked, as casually as she could manage, "Is everything all right? You seem distracted lately." Something flickered behind his eyes, there and gone so quickly she almost missed it. "Pack matters," he said. "Nothing you need to worry about. I would never let anything touch you." The words should have comforted her. Instead, they settled in her stomach, like a stone, heavy and wrong, because she had heard almost the exact same phrase the night before, spoken in his voice, in a room where she was never meant to be listening. Later that morning, she walked the grounds alone, the way she often did when she needed to think, past the training yard, where young wolves sparred under the watchful eyes of their instructors, past the garden, where the pack elders liked to sit in the sun and trade old stories. She caught snatches of conversation as she passed, voices dropping the moment they noticed her, eyes sliding away too quickly. It was not new exactly. She had noticed it before, small moments of unease whenever she entered a room unannounced, but this morning it felt sharper, more deliberate, as though the whole pack was holding a secret just out of her reach. Near the edge of the eastern gardens, she found Callum, one of the younger warriors who had always been kind to her, unfailingly polite, in a way that felt genuine rather than performed. He was cleaning his blade on a low stone bench, and when he saw her approaching, something crossed his face that looked almost like guilt. "Luna," he said, rising quickly and bowing his head. "Please," Ren said, managing a small smile. "You don't have to do that every time." "Old habits," he said, though he did not quite meet her eyes. She studied him for a moment, weighing whether to ask the question, pressing against her ribs. Finally, she decided there was no version of subtlety that would serve her better than simple honesty. "Callum, has something happened? People have been strange around me all morning." He hesitated, his jaw working as though he were chewing on words he did not want to say. "There have been scouts near the eastern border," he said finally. "Alpha Damien called an emergency meeting last night. It is being handled." "A meeting?" Ren repeated slowly. "About the border?" "Yes, Luna." "Was I meant to be at that meeting?" Callum's silence answered the question more clearly than any words could have. Ren felt something cold settle over her, the particular chill of realizing that decisions about her own pack, her own home, her own safety, were being made in rooms she was never invited into. "Thank you, Callum," she said quietly, and walked on before he could see how deeply the answer had unsettled her. She spent the rest of that afternoon in the library, pretending to read, while her mind circled the same questions over and over, like a wolf, pacing the edge of a cage it could not yet see. She thought about the day Damien had first come to her family's territory, 2 years earlier, before either of them had known that fate intended to bind them together. He had been quieter then, less certain of himself, still learning the weight of the title his father had left him too soon. She remembered how he had watched her during pack gatherings, careful and curious, never pushing, always patient. She remembered thinking that patience was a rare and valuable thing in a man who could have taken whatever he wanted simply because he was strong enough to take it. Somewhere between that patient young alpha and the man who now flinched every time she touched the Moonstone, something had shifted. Ren did not yet know what. She only knew that the shift had a name, and the name was Genevieve. Near mid-afternoon, she found herself walking without any real destination, drifting toward the older part of the manor grounds, where the retired members of the pack often gathered to enjoy the sun. It was there that she came across Alara, the former Luna, sitting on a stone bench beneath a wide old oak tree, her silver hair catching the light, her hands folded calmly in her lap, as though she had been waiting for someone. "You look like a woman, carrying something too heavy for one pair of shoulders," Alara said, without looking up. Ren hesitated, then sat down beside her, grateful for the shade and the quiet. "Is it that obvious?" To an old woman who has worn that exact expression before? Yes. Alara turned to study her, kind eyes sharp beneath their soft wrinkles. "You want to ask me something. I can feel you circling it." Ren considered lying, considered saying it was nothing, but something about Alara's steady gaze made pretending feel pointless. "The Moonstone," she said quietly. "What does it actually mean? Not the ceremony version. The real meaning." Alara was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tightening slightly around each other. "It is not simply jewelry, child. It is memory. It carries the pack's recognition inside it, generation after generation, back to the very first Luna who ever wore one. When an alpha places it on his mate, he is not just declaring his own feelings. He is asking the pack itself, the instinct that lives in every wolf's blood, to accept her as their own. That instinct does not lie, even when the people wearing it do." "Can it be given away?" Ren asked carefully. "Even for a short time?" Alara's eyes sharpened further, and for a moment Ren feared she had revealed too much. "Why do you ask that particular question?" Ren looked down at her hands, unwilling to say the full truth out loud. Not yet. Not until she understood it better herself. "I am simply curious," she said, which was not entirely a lie. Alara studied her for a long moment, clearly unconvinced, but she did not press. "It should never leave the hands of the one it was given to," she said finally, her voice low and careful. "Not for safety, not for strategy, not for any reason at all. If it ever does, and the pack's instinct shifts towards someone else, even briefly, that is not a small thing, Ren. That is the beginning of something that cannot always be undone." The warning settled over Ren like a physical weight, and she thanked Alara quietly, before rising, and continuing her walk. Her mind now heavier than before rather than lighter. She had gone looking for reassurance, and found instead a confirmation of the very fear she had been trying not to name. By the time evening fell again, Ren had made a decision. She would not confront Damien outright. Not yet. Not until she understood the full truth of what was happening beneath the surface of her marriage. Instead, she would watch. She would listen. She would learn to move through her own home the way a hunter moves through unfamiliar woods, careful and quiet, gathering every scrap of information before choosing where to strike. That night, she waited until the house had gone fully silent before slipping out of bed once more. She made her way toward the study, and this time she did not hesitate at the door. She eased it open just enough to slip inside, and there, on Damien's desk, sat the wooden case that had once protected the Moonstone, empty now, its velvet lining still holding the faint impression of the stone that no longer rested there. Beside the case lay a folded piece of parchment, half hidden beneath a stack of pack ledgers. Ren's fingers trembled slightly as she reached for it, some instinct warning her that whatever was written there would change everything. She unfolded it carefully. It was a letter, unfinished, the handwriting unmistakably Damien's. Only a few lines were written, the rest of the page left blank, as though he had started to write something, and then thought better of finishing it. Genevieve, I know what I am risking by trusting you with this. I know what it will look like if anyone learns the truth, but I cannot keep pretending that the bond means what it once did. Not when... The sentence stopped there, abandoned mid-thought, the ink slightly smudged, as though he had pressed his hand against the page before he could finish. Somewhere down the hall, a floorboard creaked. Ren's whole body went still. She listened, every sense sharpened, straining to catch the sound again, over the frantic beat of her own pulse. A second creak followed, closer this time, unmistakably footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving toward the study door. She had only seconds to decide what to do, and no good option presented itself. If Damien found her here, holding this letter, she would have to explain herself, and she was not ready. Not yet, not until she knew what she was truly facing. She folded the parchment as quickly and carefully as she could, sliding it back beneath the stack of ledgers exactly as she had found it, and stepped away from the desk just as the door creaked open behind her. It was not Damien. A young pack servant named Odette stood in the doorway, a candle in her hand, her eyes widening in surprise at finding the Luna alone in the study so late at night. Luna, forgive me. I did not know anyone was in here. I only came to bank the fire before it burns too low. Of course, Ren said, forcing her voice into something calm and unbothered, though her heart was still slamming against her ribs. I could not sleep. I came looking for something to read. Odette's gaze flicked briefly toward the empty wooden case on the desk, and something uncertain passed behind her eyes, there and gone so quickly that Ren almost convinced herself she had imagined it. Of course, Luna. I will leave you to it. The girl banked the fire quickly and left, and Ren stood alone once more in the dim light, her hands still trembling faintly. She realized, with a fresh wave of unease, that even the servants noticed things. Even the youngest members of the household had learned to school their expressions around her, to hide small truths behind polite obedience. How many people in this house already knew something she did not? How long had this been happening around her, quiet and unseen, while she had gone about her days believing herself safe and settled in her new life? She thought of her own mother, back in her childhood pack far to the north, who had once told her that the truest measure of a wolf's strength was not the size of her claws or the sharpness of her teeth, but her willingness to look directly at whatever frightened her most. Ren had always believed she possessed that kind of courage. Now, standing in the dim study with her husband's unfinished confession, still warm from her own hands, she understood that courage was easy to claim and much harder to practice, when the truth waiting to be uncovered might cost her everything she had built. Ren stood alone in the dim study. The memory of Damien's unfinished words burned into her mind, and felt the last fragile piece of certainty she had been clinging to break apart completely. Whatever was happening between her husband and Genevieve Cole, it was not simply about wolves at the border. It was not simply about safety, or strategy, or the careful language of pack politics. It was about her, about whether she still belonged in the place the Moonstone had once promised her she would always hold. Outside, somewhere in the darkness beyond the manor walls, a wolf howled, long and low, and Ren felt the sound settle into her bones like a warning she did not yet know how to answer. She folded the letter carefully and placed it exactly where she had found it, and then she stood very still in the quiet study, listening to her own heartbeat, and understood, with sudden, terrible clarity, that the woman she had been 6 months ago, standing proud and certain before the whole pack, no longer existed. Something new would have to take her place, something sharper, something that would not simply wait to discover what was being taken from her. Whatever came next, Ren promised herself silently, as she made her way back through the dark, silent halls of her own home. She would not be the last to know the truth of her own life. Someone was watching her from the tree line. Ren felt it before she saw it, the prickling awareness that had kept her ancestors alive for centuries, the sense that told her eyes were fixed on her back, even when she could not name whose eyes they were. She was walking the eastern path near the border fence, a route she had taken 100 times without incident, and yet today the hair on her arms stood on end, and her steps slowed almost against her will. She turned, scanning the dense line of pines that marked the edge of the Royal Pack's territory. For a moment, nothing moved. Then a shape shifted between two trunks, low and quick, gone before she could be certain of what she had seen. A deer, perhaps, or perhaps not. Her heart beat faster as she backed slowly toward the manor, refusing to run, refusing to give whatever watched her the satisfaction of seeing her fear. When she finally reached the safety of the gardens, she found Callum near the training yard and told him what she had seen. "Probably nothing," he said, though his jaw tightened in a way that suggested he did not entirely believe his own words. "I will send someone to check the border markers." "Callum," Ren said carefully, "is this connected to the scouts you mentioned before? The ones near the eastern border?" He hesitated a beat too long before answering. "The Alpha is handling it, Luna." There it was again, that same phrase, smooth and practiced, designed to close a conversation rather than open one. Ren thanked him and walked away, but the unease followed her all afternoon, coiling tighter in her stomach with every hour that passed. That evening, Damien returned from a ride along the border looking tired, in a way she had not seen before, dust on his boots, a shallow scratch along his forearm that he dismissed as nothing when she reached for it with worried hands. "It is fine," he said, pulling his arm gently away from her. "A branch caught me, nothing more." "You were riding the border alone?" "I had Roland with me." He rubbed a hand over his face, and for a moment, the careful mask he usually wore slipped, revealing something raw and exhausted underneath. "The scouting reports are getting worse, Ren. I did not want to worry you, but there is a real possibility the Draven Pack is testing our defenses. If they are, they will come for the Moonstone first. It is the surest way to break a pack's spirit, taking the thing that proves who its Luna truly is." For the first time since she had overheard the conversation in the study, Ren allowed herself to wonder if perhaps she had misjudged the situation entirely. Perhaps the danger was real, and Genevieve's involvement was exactly what it appeared to be on the surface, a skilled warrior lending her strength to a genuine crisis. She wanted to believe it. Some tired, hopeful part of her wanted very badly to believe it. But then she remembered the smile on Genevieve's face in the lamplight, the way she had said the words for one night as though she found the phrase quietly amusing, and the hope curdled into something more cautious. "Then let me help," Ren said. "If there is a real threat, I do not want to sit inside these walls waiting to be protected. Teach me. Let me train with the others." Something flickered across Damien's face, surprise perhaps, or something closer to alarm. "That is not necessary. You have people who exist to protect you." "I did not marry into this pack to be protected like a piece of furniture, Damien. I want to understand what is happening, all of it." He studied her for a long moment, and she watched him decide, right in front of her, how much of the truth he intended to share, and how much he intended to keep locked away. It was a small moment, barely a breath, but it told her everything she needed to know about the state of her marriage. He was choosing, deliberately, what version of the truth she was allowed to have. "I will think about it," he said finally, and kissed her forehead in a way that felt more like a door closing than an act of affection. That night, Ren lay awake long after his breathing had evened into sleep beside her, staring at the ceiling, turning over every piece of the puzzle she had gathered so far. A threat at the border, perhaps real. A letter, unfinished, that spoke of trust and risk in language far too intimate for simple pack strategy. A wife kept carefully outside the circle of decisions being made about her own safety. A woman named Genevieve, who moved through Damien's life with an ease that unsettled Ren more than any border threat ever could. She thought of Alara's warning beneath the old oak tree. That is the beginning of something that cannot always be undone. The next morning, Ren decided that watching quietly was no longer enough. If Damien would not tell her the truth directly, she would have to find it herself, piece by piece, no matter how carefully it was hidden from her. She began with the pack's records, requesting access to the recent border reports under the simple explanation that she wished to understand pack matters more fully as Luna. The steward who managed such things, an older wolf named Bertram, seemed pleased by her interest and handed over a stack of parchments without hesitation. Wren spent the better part of the morning in the library, poring over them, searching for any mention of scouting activity along the eastern border. What she found unsettled her more than she expected. The reports were vague, almost suspiciously so, filled with general language about increased patrols and heightened vigilance, but lacking the specific details she would have expected from a genuine security concern. No named threats, no confirmed sightings of draven wolves, no incidents beyond a single unverified report from 3 weeks earlier, long before Genevieve had returned to the pack at all. If the danger was real, it was thin enough that Wren began to wonder whether it had been stretched deliberately, exaggerated just enough to justify decisions that had little to do with border security at all. She was still turning this over in her mind when Bertram appeared in the library doorway, an anxious expression on his weathered face. "Luna, might I have a word?"
"Of course."
He glanced behind him, as though checking that the hallway was empty, before stepping fully into the room and lowering his voice. "I do not wish to speak out of turn, but you asked about the border reports, and I feel I owe you honesty, even if it is not my place to give it." Wren's pulse quickened. "Please, Bertram. Whatever it is, I need to hear it." "The scouting concerns," he said carefully, "were raised most strongly, not by our own warriors, but by Miss Cole, shortly after her return to the pack. She has convinced the Alpha that the threat is significant. I do not say this to accuse her of anything untrue. Perhaps she sees a danger the rest of us have missed. But I have served this pack for 30 years, Luna, and I have never known a threat this vague to command this much attention, or to result in changes to how the Moonstone itself is protected." Wren's hands went very still on the parchment in front of her. "What changes?" Bertram hesitated, clearly regretting how far he had already gone, but there was no pulling the words back now. "There has been talk, quiet talk, among the senior pack members, about whether the Moonstone might be safer in Miss Cole's keeping during periods of heightened risk, given her training. I understand it has already happened once, informally. I do not know if it will happen again." The confirmation, coming from someone outside the study door, outside her own suspicious eyes and ears, landed with a different kind of weight than her own private fears had carried. This was not simply her imagination running wild in the dark. Others had noticed. Others were uneasy too, even if none of them dared to say so directly to the Alpha's face. "Thank you, Bertram," Wren said quietly, "for trusting me with this. I only ask that you not repeat where you heard it," he said, worry etched into every line of his face. "I have a family to think of." "You have my word." After he left, Wren sat alone in the library for a long time, the border reports scattered across the table in front of her, and felt the last of her doubt burn away, replaced by something colder and more purposeful. She was no longer simply a wife, wondering if her husband's attention had wandered. She was a Luna, watching her own legitimacy be quietly, carefully dismantled by people who had decided, without ever asking her, that she was not strong enough, or trusted enough to be told the truth. She thought again of the letter in Damien's handwriting, the words he had not finished writing. "I cannot keep pretending that the bond means what it once did." Whatever the bond had once meant to him, Wren understood now that it was slipping, deliberately, through fingers that had chosen to let it go. And she intended to find out exactly why, no matter how deep into the shadows of her own pack that search might lead her. That evening, walking back toward the manor as the sun dipped low behind the mountains, she passed the training yard and saw Genevieve there, sparring with one of the younger warriors, moving with a controlled, deadly grace that Wren could not help but respect, even as it unsettled her. Genevieve caught sight of her watching and paused, lowering her blade, a small, knowing smile curving her lips. "Luna," she said, inclining her head in a gesture that managed to look respectful and mocking at the same time. "Enjoying the evening air?" "Something like that," Wren said, echoing without meaning to the same words she had given Damien 2 mornings before. "You fight well." "I have had to," Genevieve said simply, and for just a moment, something flickered behind her composed expression, something that looked almost like genuine feeling rather than calculation. It was gone before Ren could name it. Trust is a rare thing in this world, Luna. I have learned to earn my place, rather than wait for it to be given to me. The words hung in the air between them, layered with meaning. Ren was certain she was not fully catching. She held Genevieve's gaze a moment longer, refusing to be the one who looked away first, and then continued toward the manor without another word, feeling those dark, watchful eyes on her back the entire way. She did not sleep well that night, and by the time morning arrived, she had decided she needed one more piece of the puzzle before she confronted anyone directly. She sought out Roland, the older warrior who had accompanied Damien on his ride along the border, finding him near the stables checking the hooves of a tired gray mare. "Luna," he said, straightening quickly, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Something I can help with?" "You rode the eastern border with Damien yesterday," Ren said. "Did you see anything? Any sign of Draven scouts?" Roland's expression shifted, careful in the way she was beginning to recognize as the particular caution of a pack member who had been told, directly or indirectly, to guard his words around her. "We saw tracks," he said slowly. "Old ones. Could have been anything. A stray wolf passing through, a hunting party from a neutral pack. Nothing I would call confirmed. But the Alpha called it confirmed." Roland's jaw tightened, and for a moment Ren thought he might refuse to answer at all. "I only follow orders, Luna. I do not question the Alpha's judgment." "I am not asking you to question him," Ren said gently. "I am asking you to tell me what you saw with your own eyes." He studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind his weathered features, some old loyalty to the pack itself warring with whatever careful instructions he had been given. Finally, he set down the cloth in his hands. "Old tracks, Luna. That is the truth. Nothing that should have caused the kind of alarm it caused." "Thank you, Roland. That is all I needed." He nodded, clearly relieved to be released from the conversation, and returned to his work without another word. Ren walked away from the stables with her mind racing faster than ever. Old tracks. Nothing confirmed. And yet somehow, from that thin, uncertain evidence, an entire narrative of danger had grown large enough to justify placing the Moonstone into another woman's hands. She found herself wondering, not for the first time, how much of what she had been told since arriving in this pack was carefully shaped truth, and how much was simple invention, dressed up to look convincing. The thought frightened her more than any wolf hiding in the tree line ever could. That afternoon, she finally worked up the courage to ask Damien directly, though she chose her words with the same careful strategy he himself seemed so fond of using. She found him in his study, bent over a stack of papers, and closed the door quietly behind her. "I spoke with Roland this morning," she said, watching his face closely. "He mentioned the tracks you found at the border were old, possibly nothing at all." Something tightened around Damien's eyes, quick and involuntary, gone almost before she could catch it. "Roland is a good tracker, but he does not see everything I see," he said carefully. "There were other signs. Scent markers along the ridge that should not have been there. I did not want to alarm the whole pack with every detail." "You did not want to alarm me, you mean?" He looked up at her then, and for a moment something almost like guilt passed across his face. "Ren, I am trying to protect you. By keeping me in the dark? By not burdening you with every fear that crosses my mind before I know whether it is real," he said, his voice rising slightly with a frustration that felt, to Ren's ear, entirely too practiced. "I am the Alpha. Protecting this pack, protecting you, is my responsibility. I would rather carry that weight alone than watch you carry it beside me and suffer for it." It was, Ren thought, a beautifully constructed answer. Noble sounding. Difficult to argue against without sounding ungrateful or unreasonable. And yet it explained nothing about why the Moonstone, her Moonstone, had spent even a single night resting in Genevieve Cole's open palm. She almost asked him directly then. The question rose in her throat, sharp and ready. But something held her back, some instinct that told her she was still missing too many pieces, that if she spent this particular truth now, before she understood the whole shape of what was happening, she would only watch him build another careful wall of explanation around it, and she would be left with nothing but his word against the evidence of her own eyes. "I trust you," she said instead, and hated a little how easily the lie slid off her tongue. "I only wish you would let me stand beside you, rather than behind you." Something softened in his expression, and for a moment, she saw a flicker of the man she had married, tired and burdened, and perhaps, in some tangled way, still caring for her beneath all the careful evasions. "Give me time," he said quietly. "Once this threat passes, everything will go back to how it was before." Ren nodded and left the study, though she no longer believed, not even slightly, that anything in her marriage was capable of simply going back to how it had been before. Too much had already shifted in the shadows. Too many careful words had already been spoken in rooms she was never meant to enter. Whatever war was quietly unfolding inside her own home, Ren understood now that it had already begun, and she intended to make certain she was not the last one standing when it finally came into the light. The scream tore through the manor just before midnight. Ren shot upright in bed, every nerve in her body suddenly wide awake, the sound still echoing in her ears, even as silence swallowed the house again. It had come from somewhere near the west wing, high and short and cut off too quickly, the kind of sound that made her blood run cold before her mind had even finished processing what she had heard. Damien was already moving, throwing on clothes with the speed of a man whose instincts had taken over before conscious thought could catch up. "Stay here," he said, but Ren was already reaching for her own robe, her feet already finding the floor. "I am not staying anywhere," she said, and something in her voice must have convinced him that arguing would cost more time than it was worth, because he simply nodded once and moved toward the door. They found the source of the scream in the West Wing corridor, where two young pack servants stood frozen, staring at a shattered window, glass scattered across the polished floor like fallen ice. One of them, a girl barely out of childhood, was pressed against the wall, her whole body trembling. "Something came through the window," she managed, her voice thin with shock. "Something large. It looked at me, and then it was gone." Damien crouched near the broken glass, studying the pattern of the shards, the angle of the break. "This was not an animal stumbling into glass," he said grimly, rising to his feet. "This was deliberate. Someone wanted to be seen." Ren felt a chill move through her that had nothing to do with the cold night air pouring through the shattered window. "A message," she said quietly. "Or a warning." Damien agreed, his jaw tight. He turned to the small crowd of pack members, now gathering in the hallway, drawn by the commotion. "Roland, take 3 warriors and search the grounds. Callum, secure the perimeter. No one leaves the manor unescorted until we understand what happened here." The pack scattered to their tasks with practiced efficiency, and Ren watched Damien move among them, calm and commanding, every inch the alpha his people needed him to be in that moment. It should have reassured her. Instead, she found herself watching the edges of the scene, the places where his authority did not quite reach, and it was there that she noticed Genevieve arriving late, dressed and armed as though she had anticipated trouble before it ever happened. "I heard the scream," Genevieve said, her eyes sweeping the broken window, with an assessment that looked almost too calm for someone genuinely surprised by danger. "This confirms it, Damien. They are testing our defenses directly now. We cannot wait any longer." "Cannot wait for what?" Ren asked, stepping forward before she could stop herself. Genevieve's gaze flicked to her, cool and measuring. "For the Moonstone to be properly secured, Luna, if they know where it is kept, and clearly they do, it needs to be moved somewhere they cannot easily find it." "And where would you suggest?" Ren asked, keeping her voice level even as something sharp and suspicious coiled tighter in her chest. "Somewhere only a handful of people know," Genevieve said smoothly. "Somewhere protected by more than a locked box on a nightstand." Ren looked to Damien, waiting for him to weigh in, to defend the arrangement that had existed since their mating ceremony, to insist that the Moonstone belonged with her regardless of any threat. Instead, he was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving between the shattered window and his wife's face, some internal calculation working behind his expression that Ren could not fully read. "We will discuss it in the morning," he said finally, which was not the answer Ren had hoped for, but was also not the immediate surrender to Genevieve's suggestion that she had feared. "Tonight, everyone rests. The grounds will be watched." The pack dispersed slowly, murmuring among themselves, and Ren found herself alone with Damien in the corridor, as servants began sweeping up the broken glass. She studied his face in the low light, searching for some sign of the man she had married, beneath the careful mask of alpha authority he wore so easily now. "Do you actually believe someone broke that window on purpose?" she asked quietly. "I believe someone wanted us to think so," he said, surprising her with the honesty of the answer. Whether that means an actual threat exists, or whether someone within these walls wants us to believe one does, I have not yet decided. It was the most honest thing he had said to her in weeks, and for a moment, Ren allowed herself to hope that perhaps he was beginning to see through the same fog that had been clouding her own judgment. "Do you have suspicions?" she asked carefully. He hesitated, and in that hesitation, Ren saw the truth before he ever spoke it aloud. He suspected something. He simply was not ready to say the name out loud, not even to her, not even in the privacy of an empty corridor at midnight. "Get some rest," he said instead, pressing a kiss to her forehead that felt, once again, more like an ending than a comfort. "We will speak more in the morning." Ren did not sleep. She lay awake long after the manor had settled back into silence, replaying every detail of the broken window, the careful timing of Genevieve's arrival, the calm certainty with which she had suggested moving the Moonstone to some undisclosed location, known only to a select few. It was, Ren realized, precisely the kind of arrangement that would give Genevieve exactly what she seemed to want: continued, unquestioned access to the very object that determined whose scent the entire royal pack would instinctively follow. By dawn, Ren had decided she could no longer simply watch and wait. If someone was staging incidents to justify moving the Moonstone further and further from her own hands, she needed proof, real proof, not suspicion, and half-formed theories built from stolen glances and overheard conversations. She began with the broken window itself, returning to the West Wing corridor while most of the household still slept. The glass had been swept away, but she examined the frame carefully, running her fingers along the splintered wood, searching for any detail that might reveal the truth of what had actually happened there. It was Callum who found her there, patrolling the corridor as part of his overnight assignment, and something in his tired, watchful expression told her he had questions of his own. "You do not believe it was an intruder either," Ren said, more statement than question. Callum glanced around the empty corridor before answering, lowering his voice out of old habit. "The glass fell inward, Luna. If something large had come through the window from outside, most of the glass should have scattered inward with it, yes. But the pattern is wrong. Too even. Too controlled. I have seen enough broken windows in my years as a warrior to know what a genuine break looks like, and this was not one." Ren's pulse quickened. "You think it was staged?" "I think," Callum said carefully, "that I am a warrior sworn to protect this pack, not to question the decisions of those above me. But you asked me a direct question, Luna, and I have never been comfortable lying to your face." "Thank you, Callum, truly." He nodded once and returned to his patrol, leaving Ren alone with the confirmation of what she had already begun to suspect. Someone had staged the broken window, had frightened a young servant badly enough to make her scream convincingly, all to build a case for moving the Moonstone further out of reach. The question that remained was whether Damien was part of the deception, or whether he too was being carefully manipulated by someone skilled enough to make manufactured danger feel indistinguishable from the real thing. Ren spent the rest of the morning trying to piece together Genevieve's movements the previous night, questioning servants carefully, casually, framing her curiosity as simple concern for the household's safety, rather than the pointed investigation it truly was. What she learned unsettled her further. Genevieve had not been in her own quarters when the scream rang out. According to one of the kitchen staff, she had been seen near the West Wing nearly 20 minutes before the window shattered, moving with purpose through a part of the manor she had no obvious reason to visit at that hour. It was not proof, not the kind that would hold up before the Pack Council, but it was enough to settle something cold and certain in Ren's chest. Genevieve was not simply responding to danger. She was, in some careful, deliberate way, creating the conditions that justified her own growing influence. That afternoon, Ren finally found the courage to seek out Genevieve directly, choosing a moment when the woman was alone near the training yard, cleaning a blade with the same unhurried precision she brought to everything she did. "You were seen near the West Wing last night," Ren said, keeping her voice light, almost conversational, though her heart hammered against her ribs, before the window broke. Genevieve did not look up from her blade, though something in the set of her shoulders shifted, sharpened. "I was checking the perimeter. It is part of my role now, Luna, ensuring the manor's defenses are sound." "A role Damien gave you." "A role I earned," Genevieve corrected, finally lifting her eyes to meet Ren's directly. There was no hostility in her gaze, which somehow made the moment feel more dangerous rather than less. You do not trust me, Luna. I understand why. But ask yourself honestly, has anything I have done actually harmed this pack? Or have I simply done the work that needed doing, while others were too comfortable to notice it needed doing at all? Comfortable, Ren repeated slowly. Is that what you think I am? Genevieve tilted her head, studying her with an expression that was almost, though not quite, sympathetic. I think you were given a title before you understood what it truly required. That is not an insult. It is simply the truth. The Moonstone does not protect itself, Luna. Someone has to be willing to do whatever is necessary to keep this pack safe, even when it is uncomfortable, even when it makes others suspicious of intentions that were never anything but loyal. The words were smooth, confident, delivered with such conviction that for one unsettling moment, Ren almost believed them. That was, she realized with a sudden chill, precisely the danger Genevieve represented. Not obvious villainy, not cruelty easily recognized and resisted, but a carefully constructed narrative of loyalty and necessity that made every one of Ren's own instincts feel like paranoia rather than wisdom. I do not doubt your skill, Ren said carefully, choosing her words the way she imagined a warrior might choose the angle of a blade. I only wonder whose interests you are truly protecting. Something flickered behind Genevieve's composed expression, gone too quickly to fully read, but for just a moment, Ren thought she saw something that looked almost like respect. Careful, Luna, Genevieve said softly, returning her attention to the blade in her hands. You are asking better questions than I expected. Ren walked away from that conversation with more uncertainty than she had carried into it, but also with a new, sharper understanding of the woman she was truly facing. Genevieve was not simply ambitious or opportunistic in some careless way. She was patient, strategic, and entirely capable of making her own influence feel inevitable, rather than stolen. If Ren intended to protect what remained of her place in this pack, she would need to be equally careful, equally patient, and far more clever than she had been so far. Later that afternoon, unwilling to let the momentum of her discoveries slow, Ren sought out Ilara once more, finding her this time in the small sitting room she kept near the eastern gardens, a fire crackling low in the hearth despite the mild weather outside. You look like a woman who has learned something she wishes she had not, Ilara observed, setting aside the book she had been reading. I need to know about Genevieve Cole, Ren said, sitting across from her without waiting for an invitation. Not the version everyone repeats politely, the truth of where she comes from, and why Damien trusts her the way he does. Ilara was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the worn spine of her book. That is not a simple story, child. I have time. Ilara sighed, settling back into her chair, with the resigned expression of someone about to hand over a burden she had hoped to avoid carrying into the light. Genevieve's bloodline comes from the Cole Pack, a smaller territory that bordered our own generations ago, before a dispute over hunting grounds turned into something far uglier. Her grandmother was Luna of that pack, and by all accounts a formidable woman, respected even by rivals. When the dispute finally came to a head, the Cole Pack was broken apart, their territory absorbed, their Luna's lines scattered and diminished. Genevieve grew up hearing stories of what her family lost, and to whom. To us, Ren said quietly. To this pack, yes, generations before either of us were born. Ilara's eyes were sharp, watchful. Damien's grandfather led that campaign. It was not cruelty for its own sake, from what the old records say, simply the harsh arithmetic of survival in those years. But arithmetic does not soften the wound for the family left with nothing. Ren sat with that information for a long moment, feeling pieces of the puzzle shift and resettle into a new, more troubling shape. So when Genevieve returned to this pack, reintroduced as an old friend of Damien's, she returned to the very place that broke her family apart, generations ago, Ilara finished. Whether her intentions are simple ambition, quiet revenge, or something more complicated than either, I could not tell you with certainty. But I have lived long enough to know that wounds like that rarely heal simply because time has passed. More often, they wait, patiently, for the right opportunity to reopen. Does Damien know this history? He knows the broad shape of it, I imagine. Whether he has considered what it might mean about her true intentions, that I cannot say. Young alphas are not always eager to examine the ways old family history might shadow their present choices, especially when the person carrying that history has made herself so useful, so trusted, so difficult to suspect. Ren left that conversation with her mind spinning in new directions entirely. If Genevieve carried generations of quiet grievance against Damien's own bloodline, then her steady, patient climb toward influence within the pack was not simply ambition. It was something closer to reclamation, a slow, careful undoing of an old defeat, executed not through open conflict, but through the far more effective weapon of earned trust and careful manipulation. It explained so much, the calm confidence with which Genevieve spoke of necessity and loyalty, the patient way she had positioned herself as indispensable rather than threatening. Even the strange, layered warmth Ren had glimpsed once or twice beneath Genevieve's composed exterior, the sense that whatever she was doing, she did not consider herself the villain of this particular story. She likely considered herself, Ren realized with a chill, the rightful heir to something that had been unjustly taken from her family long before either of them had been born. That understanding did not make Genevieve any less dangerous. If anything, it made her more so. A person motivated by simple greed could often be reasoned with, bought off, or outmaneuvered through appeals to self-interest. A person motivated by generations of inherited grievance, convinced of the fundamental righteousness of her own cause, was far harder to stop, because she did not believe she was doing anything wrong at all. Ren spent the remainder of the afternoon walking the grounds alone, turning this new knowledge over in her mind, searching for some strategy that might account for it. She thought of confronting Genevieve directly with what she now knew, but quickly discarded the idea. Genevieve was too composed, too practiced, to be rattled by history she likely already understood better than Ren herself did. Direct confrontation would only reveal how much Ren had learned, without gaining her any real advantage in return. No, she decided finally. Patience would have to be her own weapon now, just as it had clearly been Genevieve's for longer than Ren had even been part of this pack. She would continue watching, continue gathering proof, continue building a case that could not be dismissed as simple jealousy or suspicion, until the moment came when she could lay the full truth before the pack council, undeniable and complete. That evening, as the household settled into an uneasy quiet following the previous night's disturbance, Ren found Damien in the study once more, staring at a map of the pack's territory spread across his desk, his expression heavy with a burden she could not fully name. "I spoke with Genevieve today," she said, watching his reaction carefully. His eyes lifted to hers, something guarded settling behind them. "About what?" "About the broken window. About her movements last night." Ren stepped closer, choosing her next words deliberately. "Damien, I need you to answer me honestly. Do you truly believe the danger at our border is real, or has someone convinced you it is real, for reasons that have nothing to do with the Draven pack at all?" For a long moment, he said nothing, his gaze dropping back to the map spread before him, tracing invisible lines only he could see. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than she had ever heard it, stripped of the careful alpha authority he usually wore like armor. "I do not know anymore," he admitted. "I want to believe it is real, because if it is not, then I have to face what that means about my own judgment, about how easily I let myself be guided somewhere I should never have gone." It was not a full confession, not yet, but it was the first crack Ren had seen in the careful wall he had built around himself, since the night the Moonstone disappeared from her nightstand. She reached across the desk and took his hand, and for a moment, in the dim lamplight, she felt something almost like hope stir beneath the exhaustion and suspicion that had settled so heavily over the past few days. "Then let us find the truth together," she said, "before it is too late to undo whatever mistakes have already been made." Damien studied her for a long moment, something raw and uncertain moving behind his eyes, and for the first time since the night she had watched the Moonstone pass into another woman's hand, Ren allowed herself to believe that perhaps her husband was not entirely lost to whatever careful manipulation had taken hold of their home. "Then let us find the truth together," she said, "before it is too late to undo whatever mistakes have already been made." Damien studied her for a long moment, something raw and uncertain moving behind his eyes, and for the first time since the night she had watched the Moonstone pass into another woman's hand, Ren allowed herself to believe that perhaps her husband was not entirely lost to whatever careful manipulation had taken hold of their home. He rose from his chair and crossed to the window, staring out at the dark shapes of the mountains beyond the manor grounds, his shoulders carrying a weight Ren had not fully appreciated until this quiet, unguarded moment. "There is something I have not told you," he admitted finally, his voice low. "Something from before we were mated, something I have carried carefully, foolishly perhaps, believing it did not matter to the life we were building together." Ren felt her pulse quicken, uncertain whether she wanted to hear whatever confession was about to follow. "Tell me." "Genevieve and I knew each other briefly, years ago, before either of us understood the weight our families carried between them," he said. "It was nothing lasting. A season of foolish youth, quickly ended when I learned the history our two bloodlines shared. I told myself, when she returned to this pack months ago, that the past no longer mattered, that I trusted her only for her skill and her loyalty to the pack's safety. I see now that I was not being entirely honest with myself about how much of that old familiarity still lingered, quietly, beneath the surface of every decision I made where she was concerned." The admission landed heavily, though strangely, Ren found it easier to absorb than she might have expected. It did not excuse what had happened. The Moonstone passed carelessly into another woman's keeping, the weeks of careful deception that had followed. But it offered, finally, an honest thread of explanation, rather than another careful evasion, and Ren found she valued that honesty more than she valued any comfortable reassurance he might have offered instead. "Thank you for telling me," she said quietly. "I wish you had trusted me with it sooner." "I know," he said, turning back to face her, regret etched plainly across his features. "I am trying to do better, Ren. I do not know if it will be enough." "Neither do I," she admitted honestly. "But I would rather face uncertainty built on truth than false comfort built on convenient silence." But even as hope flickered fragile and small between them, some deeper instinct warned her that the truth, once fully uncovered, would demand a price far greater than either of them yet understood. The wooden box on the nightstand was empty again, and this time Ren was not surprised. She had suspected it would happen eventually, some quiet part of her preparing for the moment even as another part of her had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that the honest conversation she and Damien shared in the study might have changed something. It had not. 3 nights after the broken window, 3 nights after he had admitted, however briefly, that his own judgment might have been compromised, the Moonstone had vanished from its box once more. Ren did not chase after voices in the hallway this time. She simply stood beside the empty box, staring at the velvet lining that still held the faint impression of a weight it no longer carried, and felt something inside her shift from uncertainty into resolve. She found Damien in the kitchen the next morning, already awake, already dressed, a cup of untouched tea cooling in front of him. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression told her he already knew what she had discovered. "It happened again last night," she said, keeping her voice level, though her hands trembled slightly at her sides. "The Moonstone." "I know," he said quietly. "Genevieve came to me late. She said one of the scouts reported movement near the ridge, close enough to be a real concern. I made the decision quickly, without waking you. I thought it would be safer." "Safer than what, Damien? Safer than trusting your own wife to defend her own protection? Safer than simply telling me the truth and letting me decide for myself whether I felt secure?" He set down the teacup, rubbing a hand over his tired face. "I do not know what the right answer is anymore, Ren. Every time I try to think clearly about this, it feels like the ground shifts beneath me." "Then stop letting her be the only voice in the room when those decisions get made," Ren said, her frustration finally breaking through the careful composure she had maintained for days. "I want to be present the next time any decision is made about the Moonstone. I want to hear the reports myself, not secondhand, not after the fact. I am your mate, Damien. I am this pack's Luna. I have a right to be part of decisions that determine whether that title means anything at all." Something in her tone must have finally reached him, because he nodded slowly, something resembling shame settling into the lines of his face. "You are right," he said. "I have handled this poorly. I will call a meeting this afternoon, with the senior council present. We will discuss the threat openly, and we will decide together what should be done about the Moonstone's safety." It was not everything Ren wanted, but it was more than she had received in weeks, and she accepted it as a foothold rather than a full victory. "Thank you," she said. "That is all I am asking." The meeting convened that afternoon in the Great Hall. The senior council gathered around the long table that had witnessed generations of pack decisions before this one. Ren sat at Damien's side, forcing herself to project calm confidence, even as her stomach twisted with nerves. Genevieve sat further down the table, composed as always, her expression giving away nothing of whatever calculations moved behind her dark eyes. "We have gathered to discuss the ongoing security concerns along our eastern border," Damien began, "and to decide, as a council, how best to protect the Moonstone going forward." Bertram, seated near the head of the table, cleared his throat carefully. "Might I ask, Alpha, precisely what evidence we have of an active threat? I have reviewed the scouting reports myself, and I confess, I found them thinner than the current level of concern would suggest." A ripple of quiet agreement moved through several of the older council members, and Wren felt a small flicker of hope. She was not the only one who had noticed the gap between the vague reports and the drastic response they had produced. "The tracks near the ridge, combined with the incident at the West Wing window," Genevieve began, but Bertram raised a hand gently, cutting her off with the careful authority of a man who had served this pack far longer than she had. "With respect, Miss Cole, the window incident troubles me as well. I have spoken with several members of the household staff, and the details do not entirely align with an intruder breaking in from outside." He turned to Damien directly. "Alpha, I do not say this to accuse anyone of wrongdoing, but I believe this council deserves a full and careful investigation before we continue making changes to how the Moonstone is protected, changes that affect not just its safety, but the pack's very understanding of who our Luna is." Wren watched Genevieve's face carefully during this exchange, searching for any crack in her composure. She found only the faintest tightening around her eyes, gone almost as quickly as it appeared, before Genevieve spoke again, her voice smooth and measured. "I understand the council's caution," she said. "Truly, I do. But I would rather be accused of excessive vigilance than watch this pack suffer because we hesitated when action was needed. If the council wishes to investigate the window incident, I welcome it fully. I have nothing to hide." It was, Wren thought, a masterful response, one that managed to sound both humble and utterly unshakable at the same time. Several council members nodded, visibly reassured, and Wren felt the small foothold of hope she had gained slipping away again beneath the weight of Genevieve's careful performance. "Nonetheless," Damien said, and Wren turned to him in surprise, "I agree with Bertram. We will conduct a full investigation into the recent incidents before any further decisions are made about the Moonstone's protection. Until that investigation concludes, the Moonstone remains with Wren, as it always has, and it does not leave her possession under any circumstances." The relief that flooded through Wren was almost dizzying. She had not expected him to take her side so directly, so publicly, in front of the entire council. For a moment, looking at him, she saw again the man she had married, the one who had placed the Moonstone around her neck with such careful reverence 6 months before. Genevieve's expression did not change, not visibly, but something in the air around her seemed to cool, some invisible temperature dropping in a way Wren could feel even without being able to name it precisely. "Of course, Alpha," Genevieve said smoothly. "Whatever the council decides." The meeting concluded shortly after, the council members filing out with the low murmur of pack business concluded, and Wren found herself walking back toward the manor beside Damien, a fragile sense of hope settling over her for the first time in what felt like weeks. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for standing with me in there." "You were right," he said, and there was something almost humble in his tone that she had not heard from him in a long time. "I let myself be guided somewhere I should not have gone. I am not entirely certain why, even now, looking back at it, but I intend to be more careful from this point forward." They walked in silence for a while longer, the evening air cool and settling around them, before Damien spoke again, his voice quieter now. "When my father held this position, before he passed the title to me, he used to say that the surest way to lose a pack was not through weakness, but through certainty. He believed the moment an alpha stopped questioning his own judgment was the moment he became vulnerable to those clever enough to exploit that blindness. I did not fully understand what he meant until these past few weeks." "And now?" Wren asked. "Now I understand it far too well," he admitted. "I convinced myself I was acting decisively, protecting this pack from a genuine threat, when in truth, I had simply stopped questioning whether the version of events I was being given was the whole truth. I let certainty replace vigilance, and it very nearly cost us everything." Ren considered his words carefully, recognizing in them the first true sign of the self-reflection she had been waiting weeks to hear. Your father sounds like he was a wise man. He was, Damien said, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. I only wish I had remembered his counsel sooner, before it took a broken window and a frightened servant to remind me of it. Ren wanted to believe him completely, wanted to let herself relax fully into the relief of finally being heard, finally being trusted with the truth of her own home. But some careful, watchful part of her, the part that had learned hard lessons over the past several weeks, refused to let its guard down entirely. Genevieve had not argued in that meeting. She had not fought to keep her growing influence over the Moonstone's protection. She had simply agreed, gracefully, without complaint, and something about that easy surrender troubled Ren more than open resistance would have. 2 days later, Bertram requested a private audience with Ren, finding her in the library where she had taken to spending her mornings, still combing through old pack records whenever she found the time. He closed the door behind him carefully, and Ren set aside the ledger she had been reading, sensing immediately that whatever he had come to share was not meant for other ears. The investigation into the window has concluded, Luna, he said, lowering himself into the chair across from her. I wanted you to hear the findings before they are presented to the full council. Please, Ren said, leaning forward. The glass pattern confirms what several of us suspected. The break was staged from inside the manor, not caused by anything entering from outside. We found faint traces of blood on the outer sill, consistent with someone having deliberately struck the glass with a gloved hand before retreating back into the corridor rather than climbing through from the grounds. Ren's pulse quickened. Do you know who? Bertram hesitated, weighing his next words carefully. We cannot prove it conclusively, but a servant recalled seeing Miss Cole near that section of the manor earlier that evening, hours before the household had been told she was patrolling the perimeter. It does not prove her guilt outright, but combined with everything else, the vague border reports, the convenient timing of each incident, I believe this council has grounds to question her role in these events, far more directly than we have so far. Will you present this to Damien? I intend to present it to the full council, Luna, Damien included. I think it important that these findings not rest in his hands alone, to interpret as he sees fit. Forgive me for saying so plainly, but I have watched him struggle to see clearly where Miss Cole is concerned. I would rather the full weight of the council's judgment stand behind whatever comes next. Ren felt a complicated rush of gratitude and unease at his words. Gratitude, because finally, someone else within the pack was willing to name directly what she had spent weeks suspecting in careful, frightened silence. Unease, because she understood now that whatever quiet war had been building beneath the surface of her marriage was about to become impossible to hide, impossible to smooth over with careful words and half-explanations. Thank you, Bertram, she said, for your honesty and your courage. It is not courage, Luna, he said, rising slowly from his chair. It is simply loyalty to this pack, and to the truth it deserves, regardless of how uncomfortable that truth becomes, for those of us who must speak it. After he left, Ren sat alone in the library for a long time, turning the news over in her mind. Proof, real proof, finally within reach. She should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt only a kind of bracing dread, the sense that whatever came next would not simply resolve itself quietly, that Genevieve, once cornered, would not surrender easily or gracefully. That evening, walking past the training yard on her way back from the gardens, Ren caught sight of Genevieve once more, standing alone near the fence line, staring out toward the eastern border with an expression Ren could not quite read from a distance. There was no anger visible in her posture, no obvious frustration at having been overruled before the full council, only a kind of patient, calculating stillness, the posture of someone recalculating a plan rather than abandoning one. Ren almost turned away without approaching, but something in her, some new steadiness she had not possessed even a week before, carried her forward instead. Genevieve heard her footsteps and turned, her expression settling instantly back into its familiar composed mask. Luna, she said, come to enjoy the sunset, or to ask me more careful questions. Bertram completed his investigation into the window, Ren said, watching closely for any reaction. The glass broke from the inside. Someone struck it deliberately, with a gloved hand, and retreated back into the corridor rather than climbing through from the grounds. For the first time since Ren had met her, something genuine flickered across Genevieve's face, quick and unguarded, gone almost before it fully formed. It was not fear exactly. It looked closer to calculation, the swift, silent recalculating of a strategist who has just learned her opponent holds a stronger hand than expected. "That is troubling news," Genevieve said finally, her voice betraying nothing beyond mild concern. "I hope the council finds whoever is responsible. Deceiving this pack about a genuine threat is a serious matter." "You were seen near that section of the manor earlier that evening," Ren said, keeping her voice steady, despite the pounding of her own heart. "Before you claimed to be patrolling the perimeter. I was near many parts of the manor that evening, Luna. I do not account for every step I take to satisfy suspicion." Genevieve's tone sharpened slightly, the first true edge Ren had heard in her voice. "If you believe I orchestrated some elaborate deception simply to hold a piece of jewelry for a single night, I think you credit me with either far too much ambition or far too little sense. What would I possibly gain?" "I do not know yet," Ren said honestly, "but I intend to find out." Something passed between them in that moment, a current of understanding that needed no further words. Whatever careful pretense of polite tolerance had existed between them until now had shifted into something more honest, more openly adversarial, even as both women kept their voices calm and their expressions composed. "Be careful, Luna," Genevieve said finally, turning back toward the darkening horizon. "Chasing shadows too eagerly sometimes means missing what is standing directly in front of you." Ren did not respond, though the words followed her long after she had walked away, turning over in her mind with an unease she could not quite name. It had sounded, for just a moment, less like a threat and more like a warning, as though Genevieve believed some greater danger existed beyond their own quiet rivalry, some threat neither of them had yet fully seen. She dismissed the thought as she made her way back toward the manor. Whatever Genevieve wanted her to believe, whatever careful misdirection she was attempting now that her earlier deceptions had begun to unravel, Ren refused to let it distract her from the truth she had already begun to uncover. Ren walked on toward the manor, feeling the fragile hope of the afternoon's victory settle into something more cautious, more clear-eyed. The council's decision had bought her time and restored, at least publicly, her rightful claim to the Moonstone's protection. But watching Genevieve's still, patient figure silhouetted against the darkening sky as she walked away, Ren understood with sudden clarity that a single council meeting, however satisfying, had not ended anything at all. It had simply forced whatever was truly happening beneath the surface of her marriage, her pack, and her own uncertain future, to move more carefully, more quietly, into the shadows where it could continue growing, unseen, until it was ready to surface again, in a form she might not see coming, until it was already too late to stop. She returned to the manor that night with the Moonstone safely back in its wooden box beside her bed, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself the small comfort of feeling, however briefly, that perhaps the tide had begun to turn in her favor. She did not yet know how quickly that comfort would prove to be premature. Ren woke to the sound of her own name being whispered, urgent and low, and the taste of fear already sharp in her mouth before her eyes had even opened. "Ren, wake up, now." It was Damien's voice, but stripped of its usual calm authority, edged with something close to panic. She sat up quickly, her heart already racing, and found him standing over the bed fully dressed, his face pale in the dim light of a single candle. "What is it? What happened?" "Roland found signs of a real incursion at the border," he said, already moving toward the wardrobe, pulling out a heavier coat. "Not old tracks this time. Fresh ones. At least 4 wolves, moving in formation, less than 2 miles from the manor. This is not staged, Ren. I would stake my life on it." Ren's mind raced, torn between the instinct to trust him completely and the hard-won caution she had built over the past several weeks. "How do you know it is not another manufactured threat?" "Because I saw the tracks myself, not through anyone else's report," he said, turning to face her, his expression fierce and frightened all at once. "Because Roland is with me right now, and he has no reason to lie about what we found together. Ren, I need you to trust me on this one thing. We do not have time to question every shadow tonight." Something in his voice, raw and unguarded in a way she had not heard in weeks, convinced her more than any evidence could have. She rose quickly, reaching instinctively for the wooden box on the nightstand. "The Moonstone needs to move to the vault beneath the Great Hall," Damien said. "It is the safest place in the entire manor, protected by wards older than either of us. I want you to go there yourself, Ren, not send it with anyone else. You, personally, carrying it, with Callum as your guard. I will meet you there once I have organized the defense at the border." It made sense. It felt, in the chaos of the moment, like exactly the kind of careful precaution she had been asking for all along, her own hands on the Moonstone, rather than delegated to someone else's judgment. She nodded, gathering the box against her chest, and followed Damien out into the corridor, where Callum already waited, sword drawn, his expression tense and alert. "Luna," he said, falling into step beside her, as Damien broke off toward the eastern stairs, already calling out orders to warriors gathering in the courtyard below. "This way, quickly." They moved fast through the darkened halls of the manor, the sounds of mobilizing warriors echoing distantly behind them, shouted commands, and the clatter of weapons being readied. Ren's heart pounded with adrenaline and fear, the wooden box clutched tight against her chest, as though her grip alone could protect what rested inside it. They had nearly reached the stairs leading down to the Great Hall, when a figure stepped out from the shadows of a side corridor, blocking their path. Genevieve. She was dressed for battle, a blade at her hip, her expression grim and urgent in a way Ren had never seen from her before. "Callum, the eastern gate has been breached. Damien needs every warrior there immediately. Go. I will see the Luna safely to the vault myself." Callum hesitated, his eyes flicking between Genevieve and Ren, clearly torn between the direct order and some instinct that made him reluctant to leave. "The Alpha told me to escort the Luna personally. And I am telling you, the eastern gate is breached right now, while we stand here arguing," Genevieve snapped, her urgency cutting sharp through the tense air. "Every second you waste here is a second the pack does not have. I have trained beside Damien for years. I can see one woman safely down a single flight of stairs. Go." The command in her voice was absolute, practiced, the tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed in moments of crisis. Callum looked to Ren, silently asking permission, and Ren, caught in the chaos and urgency of the moment, gave a small, uncertain nod. "Go," she said. "I will be fine." He hesitated only a moment longer, before sprinting off toward the sound of distant shouting, leaving Ren alone in the corridor with Genevieve, for the first time since their tense conversation near the fence line days before. "This way," Genevieve said, already moving toward the stairs. "Quickly, Luna." Ren followed, though something in her chest had begun to tighten with a wariness she could not fully explain, amid the chaos surrounding them. They descended the narrow stone stairs toward the Great Hall, torchlight flickering against ancient walls, and it was there, in the dim quiet away from the commotion above, that Genevieve suddenly stopped. "Give me the Moonstone." The words landed like ice water down Ren's spine. She stared at Genevieve, searching her face for some explanation, some remaining thread of the urgent battlefield logic that had carried them this far. "What?" "The vault requires a specific opening ritual, one only certain senior pack members know," Genevieve said, her voice steady, almost gentle now, entirely different from the sharp urgency she had shown moments before. "I need to place the Moonstone inside myself. It is a matter of the old wards recognizing the correct hands. Please, Luna, we do not have time to argue this." Every instinct in Ren's body screamed at her to refuse, to turn and run back up the stairs, to scream for help loud enough to bring every warrior in the manor running. But some smaller, more frightened part of her, exhausted from weeks of suspicion and uncertainty, wanted desperately to believe that this was simply another necessary step in protecting what mattered most, that Damien's trust in this woman, however troubling it had seemed, was not entirely misplaced after all. "I should be the one to place it," Ren said, her voice shaking slightly, despite her effort to sound firm. "If it requires recognition, surely the Moonstone's own bearer would satisfy that requirement better than anyone else." Something shifted in Genevieve's expression, a flicker of impatience breaking through her careful calm. "There is no time for this, Ren." It was the first time she had ever used Ren's name without the title attached, and the informality landed strangely, almost intimately, in the tense space between them. "Please, trust me, just this once." "Why should I?" Ren asked, and finally, the accumulated weight of every suspicion, Every careful investigation, every whispered warning from Alara and Bertram and Callum came rushing forward all at once. You lied about the border threat before. You staged the window breaking. You have been trying to separate me from this Moonstone since the very night I overheard you and Damien in the study. Ren backed away a single step, putting a small but deliberate distance between herself and the outstretched hand waiting for the box she carried. No, she said, and her voice, though it shook, did not waver in its meaning. Whatever this ritual is, whatever you claim it requires, it will not require it from me tonight. Not like this. Not with no time to think, no one else present to witness it, no proof beyond your word. Something flickered across Genevieve's face, frustration perhaps, or something closer to resignation. I had hoped you would trust me enough to move quickly, she said. It seems I misjudged how much damage the past weeks have already done. You misjudged nothing, Ren said. I have watched you for weeks, Genevieve. I have listened at doors I should not have needed to listen at. I have questioned servants and warriors and elders, because no one in this pack seemed willing to simply tell me the truth to my face. Do not stand here now and act surprised that I hesitate to hand you the one thing that still tells this pack who I am. For a moment, something almost like respect crossed Genevieve's features, quickly buried beneath renewed urgency. Then we are at an impasse, Luna, and time is a luxury neither of us has tonight. She glanced again toward the stairs, listening to the sounds still drifting down from above, shouted commands growing fainter now, as though the commotion elsewhere in the manor was beginning to settle. Believe what you wish about my intentions, but know that whatever choice you make in the next few moments, someone else has already decided how tonight will end. The words unsettled Ren more than any threat could have, precisely because they sounded less like manipulation and more like simple, weary honesty. She opened her mouth to demand what Genevieve meant by them, but before she could speak, footsteps sounded clearly on the stairs above, unhurried now, deliberate, and both women turned to face them. Give it to her, Ren. The voice came from the top of the stairs, and Ren's whole body went cold as she turned to find Damien standing there, his expression set in a way she had never seen before, something final and resolved that made her stomach drop. Damien, what is happening? There is no incursion, is there? The pieces were falling into place too quickly now, too painfully. You planned this. All of it. The urgency. Sending Callum away. Bringing me down here. He descended the stairs slowly, and for a moment, Ren almost believed she saw regret in his eyes, buried beneath something harder, something that had clearly already made its decision. I did not plan for you to overhear anything that first night, he said quietly, but everything since has been necessary, Ren. The pack is stronger when the Moonstone answers to strength, not simply to a bond chosen for me before I understood what I truly needed. You are choosing her, Ren said, the words tasting like ash, even as she spoke them. Over me. Over our mating. Over everything the pack believed we were. I am choosing what keeps this pack whole, Damien said, though his voice wavered slightly on the last word. Genevieve understands the weight of leadership in a way I have come to need beside me. I never meant to hurt you, Ren, but I cannot keep pretending the bond means what it once did. The unfinished letter. His own words, spoken aloud now, no longer hidden in ink on an abandoned page. Ren felt something inside her go very still, the last fragile thread of hope she had been quietly holding on to finally snapping. Please, Genevieve said softly, and there was something almost gentle in her voice now, though Ren no longer trusted gentleness from either of them. It will be easier for everyone if you simply let go. The two warriors at the top of the stairs shifted their weight, exchanging an uneasy glance that told Ren they took no pleasure in the scene unfolding before them. One of them, a young wolf she recognized only vaguely from morning drills in the training yard, would not meet her eyes at all, his gaze fixed instead on some distant point on the stone wall, as though he might disappear into it, if he simply refused to acknowledge what he had been asked to witness. Do the rest of you agree with this? Ren asked suddenly, turning to address the warriors directly, her voice steadier than she felt. Do you believe this is the right course for your pack, watching your alpha strip his own mate of the one thing that marks her legitimacy, before the entire bloodline that gave her that title? Neither warrior answered, though the silence itself spoke clearly enough. They had been given an order, and orders, in a pack built on hierarchy and loyalty, were not easily questioned, however uncomfortable the task attached to them might be. That is precisely the problem, Damien, Ren said, turning back to him, something fierce and unyielding rising in her voice, despite the fear still coiled tight in her chest. You are asking people to follow an order their own conscience clearly resists. That is not leadership. That is simply command, and command without conscience rarely holds for long. Something flickered across Damien's face, a brief, unguarded flash of doubt, quickly smothered beneath whatever resolve had carried him this far. This is not the moment for that conversation, Ren. When would you prefer it then? She asked. After the Moonstone has already left my hands? After the choice has already been made and cannot be unmade? Ren looked down at the wooden box clutched against her chest, at the only proof she had ever truly belonged in this pack, and understood with sudden, terrible clarity that no amount of holding on would change what Damien had already chosen. Two warriors she did not recognize now appeared at the top of the stairs behind him, and she realized, with a cold, sinking finality, that she was alone here, truly alone, with no one left to call for. Her hands trembled as she opened the box. You will regret this, she said quietly, looking directly at Damien as she held the Moonstone out toward Genevieve's open palm. Not tonight, not tomorrow, but you will. Genevieve's fingers closed around the stone, and the moment they did, Ren felt something shift in the air itself, some deep, ancient current rearranging beneath the manor's stone floors, invisible but undeniable, like the turning of a great and silent wheel. Take her back to her chambers, Damien said quietly, to the warriors behind him, unable to meet Ren's eyes. Guard the door. For her own safety. Ren did not resist as they led her away, climbing the stairs on legs that felt distant and unsteady, her mind still caught on the image of the Moonstone disappearing into Genevieve's closed fist. The warriors escorted her in silence, their eyes carefully avoiding hers, as though even they understood that something irreversible had just taken place, and did not know how to look at her in the aftermath of it. Back in her chambers, the door closed and locked from the outside. Ren sank onto the edge of the bed and stared at the empty wooden box, still clutched in her hands. She did not cry. The tears felt, strangely, too small a response for the enormity of what she had just witnessed, as though grief itself needed time to grow large enough to match the loss. She thought of the mating ceremony, 6 months ago, the whole pack silent and reverent as Damien placed the Moonstone around her neck. She thought of the promise embedded in that moment, not simply between two people, but between herself and every wolf who had bowed their heads that night in recognition of a bond older than either of them. She wondered, sitting alone in the dark, how much of that recognition had already begun to slip away, even now, even in these first few hours since the stone had left her hands. Somewhere beyond her locked door, she could hear the manor beginning to settle, the shouted commands of a fabricated crisis fading into the ordinary quiet of a household easing back toward sleep. No one came to check on her. No one came to explain. She sat alone with the empty box until the candle beside her bed burned down to nothing, and even then she did not move, staring into the darkness, replaying every careful word Damien had spoken at the bottom of those stairs. I cannot keep pretending the bond means what it once did. She understood now, with a clarity that felt almost peaceful in its bitterness, that he had likely been planning this moment for longer than she wanted to imagine, that the staged incursion, the sudden urgency, the careful removal of Callum from her side, had all been engineered with a precision that spoke of premeditation rather than panic. Whatever guilt she had glimpsed in his eyes at the bottom of the stairs had not been enough to stop him. It had simply been the price he was willing to pay to get what he wanted. Near dawn, exhausted beyond the reach of further tears or anger, Ren finally lay back against her pillows, though sleep would not come. She stared at the ceiling and waited for morning, and some quiet, stubborn part of her, buried beneath the grief and the fury and the disbelief, began, almost against her own will, to sharpen itself into something that felt less like heartbreak and more like resolve. Whatever the Moonstone's absence would mean for her standing among the pack, whatever humiliation the coming days intended to deliver, she refused to meet it as a woman who had simply been discarded. She had questions that still needed answers, forces still moving in the shadows that she did not yet fully understand, and she intended to face all of it with clear eyes, rather than collapse beneath the weight of a betrayal she had, in truth, seen coming for weeks. It would be witnessed by the entire pack, and by morning, everything she had ever believed about her place among them would be tested by something far older and far less forgiving than any human promise. The howl that woke the manor at dawn was wrong. Wren felt it before she understood it, a deep, instinctive wrongness that pulled her from her thin, exhausted sleep and sent her rushing to the window before she had even fully opened her eyes. Below, in the training yard, the pack had gathered in their wolf forms, dozens of them, moving in restless, confused circles, their heads lifted, noses working the air, with an urgency that looked less like a morning gathering and more like a search. They were searching for a scent, and Wren understood, with a cold drop in her stomach, exactly whose scent they could no longer find. The door to her chambers, no longer locked, opened without a knock, and Callum burst in, his face pale, his eyes wide with something that looked almost like fear. "Luna, you need to come. Something has happened. Something none of us understand." She followed him down through the manor and out into the training yard, where the confusion she had glimpsed from her window revealed itself in full, terrible clarity. Warriors who had served Damien loyally for years stood frozen, uncertain, their instincts visibly warring with their conscious loyalty. Some had shifted back into human form, standing in small, anxious clusters, speaking in low, frightened voices. Others remained in wolf form, pacing, whining, their noses lifted toward a scent that seemed to be pulling them somewhere they did not consciously wish to go. Wren found Damien near the center of the yard, and the sight of him nearly stopped her heart. He stood perfectly still, his expression a mixture of confusion and dawning horror, watching his own pack circle him at a distance, as though some invisible wall had risen between himself and the wolves he had led his entire life. "They will not come to me," he said, his voice hollow, disbelieving, when he noticed Wren approaching. "I called them. I gave the morning command, the same one I have given every day since I became Alpha. They looked at me like I was a stranger." Bertram appeared at Wren's side, his weathered face grim, his eyes carrying the particular heaviness of a man who understood exactly what he was witnessing, even as he wished desperately that he did not. "The bond has shifted," he said quietly, for Wren's ears alone. "The pack's instinct no longer recognizes him as fully bonded to the Moonstone's line. Somewhere in the manor, another scent has taken its place." Across the yard, near the far gate, a small commotion drew every eye. Genevieve stood there, dressed simply, her expression carefully composed, though something uncertain flickered behind her eyes as three warriors in wolf form approached her slowly, cautiously, their tails low but their noses working eagerly, unmistakably drawn toward her. One of them, a massive gray wolf that Wren recognized as one of Damien's most senior warriors, lowered his great head and pressed it gently against Genevieve's outstretched palm. A ripple of horrified murmurs moved through the gathered pack. "No," Damien said, his voice rising now, edged with panic. "This is not right. This cannot be right." "You gave her the Moonstone," Wren said quietly, though her voice carried clearly across the sudden hush that had fallen over the yard. Every eye turned toward her, and she felt the weight of all that attention settle over her shoulders, like a physical thing, but she did not look away from Damien's stricken face. "You gave her the Moonstone yourself, last night, at the bottom of the stairs beneath the Great Hall. Ask her. Ask any of the warriors who were there. I am not the only one who witnessed it." Silence stretched across the training yard, heavy and absolute, broken only by the low, uncertain whining of wolves still circling, still confused, still caught between old loyalty and instinct they could not fully explain to themselves. "Damien," Bertram said slowly, stepping forward, his voice carrying the weight of decades spent serving this pack faithfully. "Is this true?" For a long, terrible moment, Damien said nothing, his eyes moving between Wren's steady, unflinching gaze and Genevieve's uncertain expression across the yard. Wren watched him search for some explanation, some careful arrangement of words that might soften what was about to be revealed before the entire assembled pack. "There was a threat," he said finally, though his voice had lost all its earlier certainty. "A real threat. I believed placing the Moonstone temporarily with someone skilled in defense was the wisest choice for the pack's safety." "Temporarily," Genevieve repeated from across the yard, and something bitter and sharp had crept into her own composed voice now. "Is that truly what you told yourself, Damien?" He turned to her, something desperate in his expression. "Genevieve, the pack does not follow temporary arrangements," she said, cutting him off. And Ren could see, even from a distance, that whatever calm control Genevieve usually wore had begun to crack under the weight of what was unfolding around them. "You know this." "I know this. The bond recognizes truth, Damien, not intention. It does not care what you meant to happen. It only responds to what actually did." The gray wolf beside her whined softly, pressing closer against her leg, and Genevieve looked down at the animal, with an expression that Ren could not fully read, somewhere between triumph and genuine unease. "This is not what I wanted," Genevieve said, and for the first time, Ren believed she might be telling the truth about something. "I never asked for the pack's loyalty to shift. I only ever asked to help. And yet here we stand," Bertram said grimly, his eyes moving slowly across the confused, restless gathering of warriors, still caught between two competing instincts. "However this came to pass, intended or not, the pack's bond has shifted. That is not a small matter that time or apology can undo. That is the very foundation of this pack's leadership, called into question, before every wolf gathered in this yard." Ren stood very still, watching the chaos unfold around her, and felt something strange settle over her amid the horror of the moment. She had spent weeks fearing exactly this outcome, dreading the moment when her own claim to this pack's recognition might be stripped away entirely. Now, watching Damien's stricken face as warriors who had once obeyed his every command circled him with uncertain, searching eyes, she understood that the true cost of his choice had fallen not on her alone, but on the very structure of leadership he had spent his whole life building. "What happens now?" Someone called from the gathered crowd, voice tight with fear. "Who leads us if the bond no longer recognizes the Alpha?" "No one has said the bond no longer recognizes him at all," another voice countered from elsewhere in the crowd, though the uncertainty in the speaker's own tone undercut the reassurance. "Perhaps it is simply confused, divided between two claims. Perhaps it will settle again once the Moonstone returns fully to where it belongs." "And where does it belong?" a third voice pressed. "With the Luna, or with whoever the pack's instinct now favors?" The questions multiplied faster than anyone could answer them, overlapping voices rising in volume and anxiety, until Bertram raised both hands and called firmly for quiet, his authority as senior council member finally cutting through the rising panic. "Enough," he said. "These are not questions to be shouted across a training yard in fear and confusion. They are questions for the council to consider carefully, with the full weight of our pack's history and law behind whatever answer we ultimately reach. Return to your posts, all of you. The council will address this properly, and soon." The question hung in the air, unanswered, terrible in its implications. Ren looked at Damien, standing alone and exposed before his own pack for perhaps the first time in his life, and then looked at Genevieve, surrounded by wolves whose instincts had chosen her without her ever having asked for that particular burden. And then, slowly, deliberately, every eye in the training yard turned toward Ren herself, standing between the two of them, the woman whose own claim to the Moonstone had been the very thing sacrificed to create this crisis in the first place. She did not yet have an answer for them. But standing there, in the cold morning light, surrounded by the wreckage of her marriage and the fracturing loyalty of an entire pack, Ren understood with sudden, absolute clarity that whatever came next would be decided, in large part, by what she chose to do in the hours and days ahead. Bertram raised his hands, calling for order across the restless yard, his voice carrying the practiced authority of a man who had steadied this pack through difficult moments before. "This is a matter for the council, not for a training yard," he said firmly. "Everyone, return to your posts. The council will convene within the hour to determine how we proceed." The pack dispersed slowly, reluctantly, warriors shifting back into human form and moving away in small, murmuring clusters, casting uncertain glances back toward Damien and Genevieve as they went. Ren remained standing where she was, watching Damien's shoulders sag under the weight of what had just happened, watching Genevieve kneel briefly to calm the gray wolf, still pressed anxiously against her leg, before it too reluctantly withdrew. Ilara appeared at Ren's side sometime during the dispersal, her silver hair loose around her shoulders, her expression grave in a way Ren had not seen from her before. "I felt it the moment it happened," she said quietly. "Even from my own quarters, half a manor away. The bond shifting is not a subtle thing, child." It moves through the pack like a change in weather, something every wolf feels in their blood whether they understand the cause or not. What happens to me now? Ren asked, her voice smaller than she intended. If the pack no longer recognizes me as bonded to their Luna, what am I? Elara studied her for a long moment before answering, choosing her words with obvious care. You are still Damien's mate, by every vow spoken between you. That has not changed, and cannot be undone by a stone changing hands, however painfully it was taken from you. But the pack's instinctive recognition, the deeper bond that made you Luna, in more than name alone, that is a separate matter, and I will not lie to you and pretend it can be easily restored. Can it be restored at all? I do not know, Elara admitted. In all my years, I have never witnessed the Moonstone's bond shift so completely, so quickly. The old stories speak of such things happening, generations ago, in times of great upheaval, but I have only ever known them as stories, not lived experience. Whether the bond can be reclaimed, and if so, how, is knowledge I fear may be lost to time, buried in records older than even I have access to. The words offered little comfort, but Ren appreciated the honesty of them nonetheless, far more than she would have appreciated a hollow reassurance meant only to soothe rather than inform. Then I will have to find the answer myself, she said, surprising herself slightly with the steadiness in her own voice. Elara's eyes sharpened with something that looked almost like approval. That is the first sensible thing anyone has said to me all morning. Across the yard, Damien finally moved, walking slowly toward Ren, with the careful, hesitant steps of a man uncertain of his welcome. Genevieve remained where she stood, watching the exchange with an unreadable expression, making no move to follow. Ren, Damien said, stopping a few paces away, his voice raw with something that sounded almost like genuine anguish. I did not intend this. Whatever you believe of me, please believe that I never meant for the bond itself to shift. I truly believed, that placing the Moonstone with her temporarily would not touch the deeper recognition. I was a fool. You were more than a fool, Ren said quietly, though the anger she expected to feel had settled, for the moment, into something colder and more exhausted. You chose her, Damien. However you dressed the decision, in careful words about safety and strategy, the truth beneath it has not changed. You chose to trust her with the one thing that made me your equal in this pack's eyes, and you did it knowing, on some level, exactly what that choice might reveal about where your loyalty truly rests. He had no answer for that, and his silence told her more than any further explanation could have. She turned away from him, toward the manor, feeling the weight of dozens of watching eyes still lingering on her from windows and doorways throughout the grounds, and understood that whatever fragile hope she had carried these past weeks had finally, completely, run its course. The council would convene within the hour, and whatever was decided there would shape the rest of her life within this pack, for better or for far, far worse. She intended to walk into that meeting with her head held high, whatever the outcome, because she refused to let this crisis, however painful, be the moment that finally broke her. She was no longer simply a wife wondering whether her husband still loved her. She was, whether she had asked for it or not, standing at the very center of a crisis that would determine the future of the entire royal pack. The council chamber had never felt so cold. Ren sat at the long table where, only days before, she had watched Damien defend her right to the Moonstone, before this same gathering of elders. Now she sat in near silence, watching those same elders exchange careful, uncertain glances, none of them quite willing to be the first to speak the words that hung heavy over every mind in the room. Bertram finally broke the silence, his voice steady, despite the gravity of what he had to say. We have never faced a situation quite like this one. The Moonstone's bond has shifted, undeniably, and the pack's instinctive recognition now rests, at least in part, with Miss Cole, rather than with our Luna or our Alpha. We must decide, as a council, how the pack moves forward. The bond can surely be reversed, one of the younger council members offered, though his voice carried little conviction. If the stone returns to the Luna's possession, it has already returned to her possession, Bertram interrupted gently. I confirmed it myself this morning. The stone rests once more in Ren's chambers, and yet the pack's warriors still hesitate before their Alpha, still turn instinctively toward Miss Cole when she passes. Possession alone has not undone what was done. A heavy silence followed this admission, and Ren felt the weight of it settle over the room like a physical thing. She had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that simply reclaiming the stone might resolve the crisis as quickly as it had begun. The truth, it seemed, was crueler and far more complicated than that. "Then what will restore the bond fully?" Damien asked, seated at the head of the table, his voice carrying none of its usual commanding certainty. "I do not know," Bertram admitted. "None of us do. This council has served the royal pack faithfully for generations, but we have never encountered a fracture quite this deep, quite this sudden. I fear the answer, if one exists at all, lies buried in records far older than any currently kept within these walls." Genevieve, seated near the far end of the table, had remained largely silent throughout the meeting, her expression carefully composed, despite the obvious tension radiating from every other person present. "I did not ask for this outcome," she said. "I want that understood plainly, before this council decides how to proceed. Whatever my past mistakes, and I acknowledge there have been several, I never intended to fracture this pack's leadership so completely." "Intentions matter little now," an elder woman near the middle of the table said sharply, the first open criticism voiced since the meeting began. "The pack does not care what you intended, Miss Cole. It only knows what its instincts now tell it, and that alone has thrown generations of stable leadership into chaos." The accusation landed heavily, and Wren watched something flicker across Genevieve's face, not quite guilt, but something adjacent to it, a recognition of consequences she had perhaps not fully anticipated, even as she pursued her own careful, patient agenda. "What do you propose, then?" Damien asked, addressing the council as a whole, though his eyes kept drifting toward Wren, with an expression she could not quite name. Bertram exchanged a long look with several of the other elders before answering. "Until a solution is found, I believe it is safest for this pack, and for everyone involved, if Miss Cole withdraws from any position of direct influence within the manor. Her continued presence, however unintentional the effect, will only continue to confuse the pack's instincts further." Genevieve's jaw tightened, but she did not argue. "I understand," she said quietly. "And the Luna?" someone else asked, glancing carefully at Wren. The question hung awkwardly in the air, and Wren felt every eye in the room shift toward her, weighing, assessing, uncertain of what answer even the council itself expected. She understood, with a sinking clarity, that her own position within the pack had become just as uncertain as Damien's, perhaps more so, since she now held the physical stone, without holding the pack's full instinctive trust to accompany it. "I would ask," Wren said, choosing her words carefully, forcing steadiness into a voice that wanted badly to shake, "for time. Time to understand what has truly happened here, and time to determine whether this bond can be restored, through means this council may not yet have considered. I do not believe abandoning my place within this pack, retreating quietly while others decide my fate, will serve anyone well, least of all the pack itself, which deserves clarity, not further confusion." Bertram studied her for a long moment, something like respect settling into his weathered features. "That seems a reasonable request, Luna. The council grants you that time." The meeting concluded shortly after, without any true resolution, only a fragile agreement to revisit the matter once more information could be gathered. Wren rose from the table, feeling both relieved and deeply unsettled, aware that the reprieve she had won was temporary at best, a pause rather than a genuine solution. In the days that followed, the manor settled into an uneasy, watchful quiet. Wren noticed the shift in how the pack treated her almost immediately, subtle at first, then increasingly difficult to ignore. Servants who had once greeted her warmly now offered careful, hesitant courtesies, their eyes sliding away too quickly, as though uncertain how much respect her title still commanded. Warriors who passed her in the halls no longer bowed their heads with the same easy deference they once had, their movements carrying a new, uncomfortable hesitation that stung more deeply than open hostility might have. She found herself, more and more, eating meals alone, walking the grounds alone, sitting in the library long into the evening, with no company beyond old records and older silence. Damien, for his part, seemed equally adrift, spending long hours locked in his study, emerging only for council business, his once easy authority now visibly strained under the weight of a pack that no longer followed him with the same unquestioning loyalty it once had. One afternoon, nearly a week after the council meeting, Wren found herself sitting alone in the garden where she had first spoken with Alara weeks before, staring out at the mountains without truly seeing them, when Callum approached hesitantly, clearly uncertain of his welcome. "Luna," he said, and something in the careful way he said the title made Ren's chest ache. "May I sit?" "Of course," she said, grateful, despite everything, for the small kindness of his continued respect. He sat beside her in silence for a long moment, before finally speaking. "I want you to know," he said carefully, "that not everyone in this pack has forgotten who you are, or what you have tried to do for us these past weeks. I have watched you seek out truth, even when it would have been easier to simply accept the comfortable lies offered to you. That matters, Luna. Whatever the bond currently says, that matters." Ren felt her throat tighten unexpectedly, moved more than she wanted to admit by the simple sincerity of his words. "Thank you, Callum. That means more than you know, especially now." "I only wish I could do more," he admitted, frustration coloring his voice. "I feel the pull toward Miss Cole too, even now, even knowing everything I know about how this happened. It does not feel like choice, Luna. It feels like something has been rewired inside me, something I cannot simply reason my way out of, no matter how much my own judgment tells me it is wrong." His honesty, painful as it was to hear, helped Ren understand more clearly the true nature of the crisis facing her pack. This was not simply a matter of convincing people intellectually that she remained their rightful Luna. The pull Callum described was instinctive, ancient, woven into the very blood of every wolf who called this pack home. No amount of reasoned argument would undo that kind of deep, biological pull. Only something equally deep, equally ancient, would ever be capable of reversing it. "Thank you for telling me the truth," she said quietly, "even when it must be difficult to admit. You deserve honesty, Luna, especially now, when so few seem willing to offer it." After he left, Ren remained in the garden long into the evening, turning his words over in her mind, alongside everything Alara had told her weeks before about the Moonstone's true nature. If the bond responded to instinct rather than simple possession, if it recognized truth rather than mere intention, then perhaps the path back to restoring it lay not in council meetings or careful political maneuvering, but in something far more fundamental, something buried deep in the pack's oldest history, waiting to be rediscovered by someone determined enough to search for it. She thought of the old records Alara had mentioned, the stories of past bond shifts that existed only as half-remembered legend rather than documented history. If such records existed anywhere, they would likely be found in the oldest part of the manor's archives, sections so ancient that even Bertram, with all his decades of service, might not have fully explored them. That night, unable to sleep, Ren rose quietly and made her way toward the manor's lower archives, a part of the building she had visited only once before, during a brief tour shortly after her mating ceremony. The air grew cooler and staler as she descended, torches flickering against walls lined with shelves of ancient parchment, records stretching back further than she could easily comprehend. She began searching methodically, section by section, her candle throwing long shadows against towering shelves of forgotten history, searching for any mention of the Moonstone's bond, any record of a time when its recognition had shifted as dramatically as it had shifted now. Hours passed in careful, dusty silence, her hope rising and falling with each unhelpful record she set aside. Just as exhaustion began to threaten her focus entirely, her fingers closed on a slim, leather-bound volume, tucked into a shadowed corner of the lowest shelf, its cover so worn that the title had faded almost entirely into illegibility. She opened it carefully and found, written in faded ink by some long-forgotten hand, an account that made her breath catch in her throat. It spoke of a Luna, generations past, whose own bond had been broken through betrayal remarkably similar to her own, and of the difficult, dangerous path that woman had walked to reclaim what had been taken from her. Ren settled onto the cold stone floor of the archive, pulling the ancient volume closer, and began to read, understanding with a fierce, quiet certainty that whatever answers she needed to reclaim her place within this pack might finally be within her reach, hidden in the dust of history where no one else had thought, or dared, to look. The account, written in careful, faded script, told of a Luna named Isolde, mated to an Alpha whose name the pages did not preserve, who had lived several generations before Ren's own arrival in the royal pack. According to the record, Isolde's bond had been broken, not through betrayal exactly as Ren had experienced it, but through a rival's deliberate manipulation of an ancient rite meant only for moments of true crisis, twisted instead into a tool of ambition. The parallels unsettled Ren deeply as she read, her candle burning lower with each page she turned. The account described how Isolde had not simply waited for the bond to repair itself, nor relied solely on the council's judgment to restore her place. Instead, she had sought out what the old record called the Trial of Recognition, an ancient ritual performed before the full pack, in which the Moonstone itself would be tested, its true bearer determined not by whoever currently held it in their hands, but by the depth and truth of the bond each claimant carried within their own blood. Ren read the passage twice, her heart quickening with something that felt, for the first time in days, almost like hope. If such a trial had existed once, and had successfully restored a broken bond generations before her own crisis, perhaps it could be invoked again now, offering a path forward that did not depend entirely on Damien's uncertain loyalty or the council's cautious deliberation. But the record also carried warnings, carefully inked in the margins by whatever hand had first recorded Isolde's story. The trial, it cautioned, was not without risk. The Moonstone's judgment, once invoked, could not be argued with or reversed through further pleading. If the trial determined that the bond rightfully belonged elsewhere, even the true, original Luna could find herself permanently severed from the pack's recognition, her claim extinguished not by politics or betrayal, but by the ancient magic itself, declaring her unworthy. Ren sat with that warning for a long time, the weight of it settling heavily over her chest. To pursue this path meant risking everything, not simply waiting to see whether time and careful diplomacy might slowly restore what had been broken, but actively wagering her entire future within this pack on the outcome of a ritual not performed in generations, one whose exact requirements the fading record only partially preserved. And yet, she thought, staring at the flickering candlelight dancing across the ancient page, what was the alternative? To remain in this uncertain limbo indefinitely, watching the pack's loyalty slip further from her grasp with each passing day, watching Damien grow more distant and uncertain, watching Genevieve's influence continue to shape decisions from the shadows, even as she claimed to have withdrawn from direct involvement. Slow decay held its own risks, perhaps quieter than the trial's dramatic gamble, but no less final in its eventual conclusion. The account also described the political turmoil that had followed Isolde's public restoration, turmoil the ancient record preserved in surprising, careful detail. Several of the pack's senior warriors at the time had refused, initially, to accept the trial's judgment, believing the entire ritual too archaic, too uncertain in its methods, to properly settle a matter as significant as the pack's leadership. It had taken Isolde months of patient, deliberate effort, the record explained, to fully rebuild the confidence of those doubtful few, proving through consistent action, rather than simply the trial's verdict, that she deserved the loyalty the Moonstone had already granted her. Ren found herself sobered by this detail, more than any other in the ancient account. It suggested that even a successful trial, should she choose to pursue one, might not resolve the crisis facing her pack entirely on its own. Trust, once fractured as badly as it had been fractured here, might require far more than a single dramatic night to fully mend, regardless of what ancient magic ultimately decided. She continued reading long into the night, searching for every detail the old record preserved about how the trial of recognition had actually been performed, what it required, who among the pack's elders held the knowledge necessary to invoke it properly. The account grew frustratingly vague in its final pages, as though whoever had recorded Isolde's story had either lost interest in preserving the finer details or had deliberately chosen not to record them fully, perhaps fearing the knowledge falling into careless or ambitious hands. What she did learn, however, was enough to give her a path forward. The trial required the presence of at least 3 elders who had witnessed a previous bonding ceremony, a full gathering of the pack to bear witness, and the Moonstone itself, held not by either claimant, but suspended between them by unaided will, guided only by whatever truth the stone itself recognized in each woman's blood. It was, Ren understood immediately, an enormous risk. She had no guarantee that such an ancient rite could even be properly performed, after so many generations of disuse, no certainty that the elders still living within her pack retained the knowledge necessary to invoke it correctly. And even if it could be performed exactly as the old record described, there remained no guarantee whatsoever that the outcome would favor her. But for the first time since the Moonstone had disappeared from her nightstand weeks before, Ren felt something other than helpless uncertainty settling into her chest. She felt, however fragile and frightening, the beginning of a plan. She closed the ancient volume carefully, tucking it beneath her arm, and made her way back up through the quiet, sleeping manor, toward her own chambers, her mind already turning over every detail she would need to gather before she dared bring this discovery before the council. She would need Alara's guidance, certainly, and likely Bertram's careful support as well. She would need to understand fully what she risked before she ever proposed such a dramatic, irreversible path forward. But as she climbed the final staircase toward her rooms, the ancient book clutched against her chest, much as the Moonstone's empty box had once been clutched there. Ren allowed herself, cautiously, to imagine a future beyond the current uncertain limbo. A future in which she stood before the entire pack, not as a wife quietly waiting to learn her fate, but as a Luna who had reclaimed her place through her own determined effort, rather than through anyone else's permission or forgiveness. Whatever came next, she intended to meet it on her own terms. Alara's teacup shattered against the stone floor, the moment Ren spoke the words trial of recognition aloud. "Where did you learn that name?" Alara asked, her voice sharp with an alarm Ren had never heard from her before, all trace of her usual calm composure gone in an instant. "The old archives," Ren said, startled by the intensity of the reaction. "There is a record, generations old, about a Luna named Isolde, whose bond was broken, and later restored through this trial." You thought correctly that it exists," Alara interrupted, rising quickly to gather the broken pieces of the teacup with hands that trembled slightly. "You thought incorrectly, if you believe it's something to be undertaken lightly." She set the broken pieces aside and turned to face Ren fully, her expression grave. "I know of the trial of recognition, child. I have known of it my entire life, though I never expected to hear its name spoken aloud in this generation. My own mother once told me the story of Isolde, passed down through whispers rather than written record, a warning rather than a hopeful tale." "A warning against what exactly?" Alara sat back down slowly, gathering her thoughts before continuing. "The trial is real, and it can restore a broken bond, as your record describes. But the cost of failure is not simply disappointment, Ren. If the Moonstone judges against you, you do not merely remain in your current uncertain position. You are cast out entirely, stripped of any claim to this pack, any claim to Damien, any claim to the life you have built here, permanently and without recourse. The old stories say some who failed the trial were driven mad by the severing, unable to bear the sudden, total loss of a bond their very blood had grown to expect." The warning settled heavily over Ren, but strangely, it did not extinguish the fragile resolve that had carried her through the long night in the archives. "And if I do nothing?" she asked quietly. "If I simply wait, hoping the council finds some gentler solution, hoping Damien's guilt eventually restores what his choices broke, what happens to me then, Alara? I have watched this pack's trust in me erode a little more with each passing day. I do not believe patience alone will reverse that tide." Alara was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing the truth of Ren's words against her own fear of what the trial might cost. "You may be right," she admitted finally, "but I would be failing you as a friend if I did not make certain you understood fully what you risk before you take another step toward it." "I understand," Ren said, and meant it, though understanding the risk and feeling its full weight were, she suspected, two very different things. "Then let me at least ensure you are as prepared as any Luna in living memory has been," Alara said, some of her old resolve returning to her voice. Alara rose then, and crossed to a small locked cabinet tucked into the corner of her sitting room, retrieving a slim iron key from a chain she wore always beneath her clothing. Inside the cabinet lay a handful of carefully preserved documents, older still than the volume Ren had discovered in the archives, their edges brittle with age. "These have been kept within my own family for generations," Alara explained, laying them carefully upon the table between them. "Passed from Luna to Luna, mother to daughter, though never spoken of openly outside these quiet, private moments. I did not show them to you sooner, because I hoped, foolishly perhaps, that you would never need them." Ren studied the fragile documents with careful reverence, recognizing fragments of the same ritual described in the archive's leather-bound volume. Though these pages offered far greater detail, Diagrams of the chalk circle's proper dimensions, notations on the precise phase of the moon required, careful instructions for the stillness and openness of mind the trial's true claimant needed to maintain throughout its duration. If you intend to pursue this, you will need 3 elders who witnessed your original bonding ceremony, Alara continued, tapping one worn page. I am one. Bertram is another, I believe, though I will need to confirm his memory of the details clearly. The third will be harder to find. Few enough of us remain who were present that night, and fewer still who I would trust to preside fairly over something as consequential as this. Over the following days, Ren and Alara worked carefully, quietly, to identify the third elder needed to properly invoke the trial, while also beginning the delicate task of researching exactly how the ritual itself needed to be performed. Bertram, once approached, agreed without hesitation, his loyalty to Ren's cause unwavering despite the obvious danger involved. I watched you fight for the truth of this pack's decisions for weeks now, Luna, he told her simply, when she asked whether he understood fully what he was agreeing to witness. I will not abandon you now, whatever the trial's outcome may bring. The third elder proved more difficult to secure. Several of the pack's oldest members, when approached carefully and in confidence, refused outright, citing fear of the trial's dangerous history, or simple reluctance to involve themselves in what remained, at its heart, a deeply painful family matter. It was only after nearly a week of careful searching that Ren finally found willing support in an elder named Ophelia, a quiet, sharp-eyed woman who had served the pack's healing traditions for decades and who, unlike many others, seemed to view the trial not with fear, but with something closer to solemn respect for its ancient purpose. I watched Isolda's granddaughter grow old within this pack, Ophelia told Ren, when they finally spoke privately in her modest quarters near the healing hall. She spoke of her grandmother's trial rarely, and always with great care, but she told me once that whatever the risks, Isolde never regretted choosing to fight for her place, rather than simply accept what circumstance had handed her. I will stand as your third witness, Luna, if you are certain this is the path you wish to walk. I am certain, Ren said, and found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she truly was. With the 3 elders secured, Ren finally brought the matter before the full council, watching carefully as her proposal landed among the gathered members with a mixture of shock, concern, and, in a few cases, something that looked almost like relief, that a decisive path forward had finally presented itself. This is not a decision to be made hastily, Bertram cautioned the room, though his support for Ren's right to pursue it remained evident in every word he spoke. But I believe, given the current uncertain state of our pack's leadership, that the council should grant the Luna's request. We cannot continue indefinitely in this fractured limbo. The trial offers a path toward resolution, however difficult that path may prove. Damien, seated at the head of the table, had said little throughout the proposal, his expression carefully unreadable. When the council finally turned to him for his response, he was quiet for a long moment before speaking. You would risk everything, he said quietly, addressing Ren directly, for the first time since the crisis had begun, on the chance of reclaiming what was taken from you. I would risk everything, Ren agreed, meeting his gaze steadily, because I refuse to simply wait and hope that guilt alone will restore what deliberate choice destroyed. I do not blame you entirely for what has happened, Damien. I understand, now, that Genevieve's own ambitions played their part in shaping the choices you made, but understanding does not erase what was lost, and I will not spend the rest of my life waiting quietly for you to decide whether I still deserve my place here. Something shifted in his expression, something that looked, for just a moment, like genuine respect, mixed with regret, too deep to fully voice. Then I will support your right to pursue it, he said finally, turning to address the full council. Whatever the trial decides, I will honor its judgment. The council granted its approval by the end of that meeting, setting the trial for 3 nights hence, when the moon would stand full and bright above the training yard, the same ground where the pack's fractured loyalty had first revealed itself so painfully weeks before. In the days leading up to the trial, Ren found herself caught between fierce determination and quiet, private fear. She spent hours with Alara and Ophelia, learning what little remained known about how the ritual needed to be performed, practicing the careful, deliberate stillness the old record suggested would be required of her, when the Moonstone itself was finally suspended between herself and whoever else the pack's fractured loyalty demanded stand opposite her. For Genevieve, too, would need to stand within the trial's circle, since it was her claim, however unintended, that the Moonstone's bond currently favored. When Wren informed her of the coming trial, delivered through a formal council notice rather than any direct conversation between them, Genevieve's response, relayed back through Bertram, had been brief and carefully measured. "I will stand where the pack requires me to stand." It was not defiance exactly, nor was it surrender. It read, to Wren's careful eye, like the response of a woman who understood precisely what she stood to lose or gain, and who had made her own private peace with whatever outcome the ancient magic ultimately chose to deliver. 2 nights before the trial, as Wren crossed the eastern courtyard on her way back from another long session with Alara, she found Genevieve waiting near the fountain, alone, her posture uncharacteristically uncertain in the fading evening light. "I did not expect to find you here," Wren said carefully, slowing but not fully stopping. "I have been waiting for you, actually," Genevieve admitted. "I wanted to speak with you before the trial, without the council or Damien standing between us. I am not certain you will believe anything I say, but I find I would rather say it, and be disbelieved, than carry it silently into that circle 2 nights from now." Wren studied her for a long moment before finally settling onto the low stone edge of the fountain, gesturing for Genevieve to join her if she wished. "Say what you came to say." Genevieve sat, choosing her words with visible care. "I will not pretend I came to this pack with entirely innocent intentions, Wren. My family's history here is complicated, and I would be lying if I said some part of me did not relish watching my influence grow within these walls that once belonged, in some form, to my own bloodline. But I never intended for the pack's bond to shift so completely. I want you to understand that, whatever else you believe of me. Intentions matter little now," Wren said quietly, echoing the words spoken against Genevieve in the council chamber weeks before. "You said as much yourself, when the elders questioned you." "I know," Genevieve said, something almost pained crossing her composed features. "And yet I find myself wishing, foolishly perhaps, that you might understand the difference between ambition and cruelty. I never wished to see you humiliated, Wren, whatever else I wished for myself in this pack." Wren considered her carefully, searching for some trace of manipulation beneath the words, some careful calculation, designed to soften her before the trial's judgment. She found, to her own surprise, only weariness, and something that looked uncomfortably close to genuine regret. "Whatever you intended," Wren said finally, "the trial will decide what matters now, not our private conversations beside a fountain. I do not say that with cruelty, Genevieve. I say it because I believe, after everything that has happened, only the Moonstone's own judgment can settle this fairly between us." Genevieve nodded slowly, accepting the answer without argument. "Then I will see you in the circle," she said. Rising from the fountain's edge, she paused before walking away, turning back with an expression Wren could not fully read. "For whatever it is worth, Wren, I hope you find whatever you are truly searching for in this. Whether that is the Moonstone's judgment in your favor, or simply peace with however this ends." She left without waiting for a response, and Wren sat alone beside the fountain for a long while afterward, turning the strange, unexpected conversation over in her mind. Whatever else Genevieve was, calculating, ambitious, driven by old grievances inherited rather than chosen, Wren no longer believed her simply cruel. It did not soften the coming trial's stakes, but it settled something uneasy in Wren's chest nonetheless, some small comfort in facing an opponent she could at least respect, even as she prepared to face her. The following evening, Damien sought her out as well, finding her in the library where she had taken to spending her final hours of preparation, surrounded by whatever fragments of old records she and Alara had managed to gather. "I do not know what to say to you," he admitted, standing awkwardly in the doorway, "except that I am sorry, more deeply than I have found the words to express these past weeks." "I know," Wren said simply, and found that she meant it, even if the knowing did not fully heal what had been broken between them. "Whatever the trial decides," he said quietly, "I want you to know that I never stopped valuing what we built together, even when my own poor judgment put it at risk." Wren studied him for a long moment, searching for the same careful evasions that had characterized so many of their conversations these past difficult weeks, and found, instead, something that looked like genuine, uncomplicated honesty. "Thank you for saying that," she said. "Whatever happens tomorrow night, I am glad to hear it before the Moonstone decides the rest." He nodded, and left her to her preparations, and Ren returned to the old records spread across the table before her, though her mind remained, for a long while afterward, caught on the strange, bittersweet comfort of two conversations she had never expected to receive. On the final night before the trial, unable to sleep, Ren walked alone through the quiet gardens beneath a moon nearly full, feeling the weight of everything she had built toward this moment, settling heavily over her shoulders. She thought of Isolde, generations past, who had once stood exactly where she now stood, facing the same impossible risk, the same uncertain future. Whatever tomorrow night brought, Ren understood, standing alone beneath the pale, watchful moon. She had chosen this path with clear eyes and full understanding of its cost. Whatever the ancient magic decided, she would meet its judgment having fought, fully and honestly, for the place she believed still belonged to her. That, at least, no outcome could ever take from her. The entire pack had gathered by the time the moon rose fully above the training yard, and the weight of hundreds of watching eyes settled over Ren like a physical thing, as she stepped into the circle marked out in pale chalk upon the ground. She had dressed simply that night, refusing any elaborate ceremonial garb, choosing instead a plain gray dress that left her hands and arms free, unadorned, exactly as the old record had instructed for whoever stood as the challenged claimant. Across the circle, Genevieve stood in similar simplicity, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, her expression composed but pale in the silver moonlight. Alara, Bertram, and Ophelia stood at 3 points around the circle's edge, each holding a small candle, whose flame burned steady, despite the light evening breeze moving through the training yard. Damien stood just outside the circle's boundary, close enough to witness everything, far enough that he could not interfere with whatever judgment the Moonstone chose to render. The trial of recognition has not been invoked within this pack for more generations than any living memory can recall, Alara announced, her voice carrying clearly across the silent waiting crowd. Tonight, we ask the Moonstone itself to judge where its true bond rests, between Ren, mated Luna of this pack by vow and ceremony, and Genevieve, whose claim upon the pack's instinct has arisen through circumstances this council has judged troubling and unresolved. A murmur rippled through the gathered pack, quickly silenced as Bertram raised his hand for quiet. "The Moonstone will be suspended between the two claimants," Bertram continued, "guided by no hand, held by no force but its own ancient judgment. Whichever claimant it moves toward, and remains with, shall be recognized as this pack's true and rightful Luna, now and until such bond is broken again by equally significant cause." Ophelia stepped forward, carrying the Moonstone itself upon a small velvet cushion, its pale surface catching the moonlight in a way that seemed, to Ren's anxious eyes, almost to pulse with its own quiet, patient energy. She placed the cushion at the exact center of the chalk circle, equidistant between Ren and Genevieve, and then stepped back to her position at the circle's edge. "Whenever you are ready," Alara said quietly, her eyes meeting Ren's with a depth of concern and encouragement that steadied something trembling deep in Ren's chest. "The trial begins the moment either of you reaches toward the stone, and once begun, cannot be stopped until judgment is rendered." Ren looked across the circle at Genevieve, who met her gaze steadily, neither of them speaking, both understanding that whatever words remained between them had already been spoken, 2 nights before, beside a quiet fountain neither of them would soon forget. Ren took a slow breath, feeling the weight of the entire pack's silence pressing in around her, and stepped forward. The moment her fingers hovered above the Moonstone, without touching it, a strange sensation moved through the training yard, a low hum that seemed to rise from the very ground itself, felt more than heard, vibrating gently through the soles of Ren's feet. Across the circle, Genevieve had stepped forward as well, her own hand hovering above the stone from the opposite side, and the low hum grew steadily louder, more insistent, as though the ancient magic itself were waking fully for the first time in generations. The Moonstone rose. A collective gasp moved through the assembled pack as the stone lifted slowly from its velvet cushion, suspended in the empty air between Ren and Genevieve's outstretched hands, spinning slowly, its pale surface now glowing with a soft, silver light, that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the low hum still rising from the ground. Ren felt something pulling at her, deep and instinctive, a sensation she could not fully name, as though the stone itself were reaching into the very core of who she was, weighing something far beyond simple thought or intention. She closed her eyes, letting the sensation move through her fully, refusing to fight it or guide it, remembering Alara's careful instruction that the trial responded only to truth, never to force or desperate wanting. She thought of the mating ceremony, 6 months before, the weight of the Moonstone settling around her neck for the first time, the way the entire pack had bowed their heads in recognition of a bond she had believed, in that moment, would last her entire life. She thought of every quiet act of care she had shown this pack since, every servant she had learned by name, every young warrior she had encouraged, every elder she had listened to with genuine respect rather than polite obligation. She thought of the weeks of investigation, painful and lonely, that she had undertaken, not for personal glory, but because she genuinely believed this pack deserved leadership, built upon honesty rather than convenient deception. The hum grew louder, the glow brighter, and Ren felt the stone's slow spinning rotation begin to shift, drawn incrementally closer to her own outstretched hand. Across the circle, she could sense Genevieve's own effort, some deep well of genuine conviction the other woman was drawing upon as well. Her own claim upon the pack's instinct not entirely without merit, whatever Ren might personally feel about the manner in which it had been won. For a long, suspended moment, the Moonstone hovered exactly between them, glowing brighter and brighter, the hum rising to a pitch that made several members of the gathered crowd cover their ears. The tension in the training yard stretched taut enough that Ren feared, briefly, the entire ritual might simply shatter apart from the strain of two genuine, competing claims pulling against each other with equal, unresolved force. Sweat gathered at Ren's temple despite the cool night air, her arm trembling slightly from the effort of holding it steady, though she understood, somewhere beneath the strain, that the trembling had little to do with physical exhaustion and everything to do with the sheer weight of ancient magic testing the truth of everything she had ever felt about this pack, this home, this uncertain, painful, precious life she had built here. She thought of Bertram's quiet loyalty, risking his own standing to support her claim. She thought of Callum's honest confession in the garden, admitting the pull he felt toward Genevieve even as his own judgment rebelled against it. She thought of Alara's careful warnings, offered not to discourage her, but to ensure she walked into this moment with clear, unclouded eyes. Across the circle, she could see the strain reflected in Genevieve's own face, a fine tremor moving through her outstretched arm as well, her jaw set with the same fierce determination Ren recognized in herself. For all their rivalry, all the painful weeks of suspicion and careful investigation that had led them both to this exact moment, Ren found herself unable to fully hate the woman standing opposite her. Genevieve's claim, however troubling its origins, was not built entirely on falsehood. She had trained herself relentlessly. She had earned, through skill and dedication, whatever respect she commanded among the pack's warriors, even if the manner in which the Moonstone itself had come into her keeping remained a betrayal Ren could not simply forgive. The gathered crowd had gone utterly silent now, hundreds of eyes fixed on the glowing, spinning stone suspended between the two women, the only sound the low, rising hum of ancient magic working through its patient, deliberate judgment. Somewhere near the circle's edge, Ren heard someone begin to whisper a prayer, old words in the pack's oldest tongue, quickly joined by others, a low murmur of hopeful invocation, rising to meet the stone's own building energy. Ren closed her eyes fully then, letting go of conscious effort entirely, trusting Alara's guidance, that the trial responded only to truth, rather than desperate force. She stopped trying to pull the stone toward herself, stopped bracing against the fear of losing, and simply allowed herself to feel, fully and without reservation, everything this pack had come to mean to her across these difficult, transformative months. The fear, the hope, the stubborn, unshakable belief that she belonged here, not because a title had been given to her, but because she had chosen, every single day since arriving, to care for this place and its people as though they were truly her own. And then, slowly, unmistakably, the stone began to move. It drifted toward Ren, inch by careful inch, the glow intensifying with each small movement, until finally, with a soft, resonant chime that seemed to echo across the entire training yard, it settled gently into her open palm, warm against her skin, pulsing with a light that felt, in that moment, like recognition made physical, like 6 months of doubt and fear finally, completely, answered. For one final, breathless heartbeat, the stone hovered exactly at the midpoint of its journey, its glow flickering between silver and something warmer, almost gold, as though the ancient magic itself paused to fully weigh the truth of what it had found. Then, with sudden, decisive clarity, the light steadied fully into warm gold, and the stone completed its journey. The training yard erupted. Wolves in both human and shifted form threw back their heads in a chorus of howls that rose into the night sky, a sound Wren had heard only once before, on the night of her original mating ceremony, the sound of an entire pack's instinct settling fully, unmistakably, into place. Warriors who had spent weeks hesitating before her now surged forward, dropping to their knees, pressing their heads low, in a gesture of complete, restored deference. Callum was among the first to reach her, his face wet with tears he made no effort to hide, kneeling before her with a fierce, relieved devotion that spoke more clearly than any words could have of how deeply the past weeks of uncertainty had weighed on him as well. "I never doubted you would find a way, Luna," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Even when I did not know how." Behind him, servants who had grown cautious and uncertain around her these past difficult weeks, now pressed forward as well, offering quiet words of relief and renewed respect, some weeping openly, others simply reaching out to touch her sleeve, as though needing physical confirmation that the crisis had truly, finally passed. Odette, the young servant who had found her alone in the study on that very first troubled night, appeared near the edge of the crowd, her expression a mixture of joy and lingering guilt for whatever small uncertainties she herself had carried these past weeks, and Wren made a point of catching her eye and offering a small, genuine smile that seemed to ease something tight in the girl's shoulders. Even Roland, who had ridden the border beside Damien on the night everything had truly begun to unravel, knelt before her with the same fierce loyalty he had once shown only to his alpha, his weathered face carrying an expression of humble, wordless apology for whatever small part his own caution and silence might have played in the weeks of confusion that had led them all to this moment. Bertram approached last, after the initial wave of celebration had begun to settle into something calmer, more sustainable, and took both of Wren's hands in his own weathered ones. "I have served this pack for 30 years, Luna," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "I have never witnessed anything quite like what unfolded here tonight. Whatever doubts I once carried about how quickly you rose to challenge circumstances far beyond what any new Luna should have to face alone, I carry them no longer." "Thank you, Bertram," Wren said, gratitude and exhaustion mingling in equal measure within her chest. "For every quiet kindness you showed me these past difficult weeks. I will not forget it." Across the circle, Genevieve stood very still, watching the stone's glow settle fully into Wren's hand, and something complicated moved across her composed features. Disappointment certainly, but also, to Wren's surprise, something that looked almost like relief, as though some part of her had been waiting, quietly, for this exact resolution all along. "The trial has rendered its judgment," Alara announced, her voice thick with emotion as she stepped forward, addressing the joyfully chaotic crowd. "Wren stands recognized, fully and completely, as this pack's true and rightful Luna." Bertram and Ophelia moved to stand beside Wren, their expressions carrying the particular satisfaction of elders who had risked their own standing to support a cause they believed just, and Damien, finally released from his position outside the circle's boundary, crossed the chalk line quickly, his eyes bright with an emotion Wren could not fully name, relief and shame, and something that looked, unmistakably, like renewed devotion. "Wren," he said, stopping just before her, uncertain, for once, of his welcome. "I do not deserve this outcome. I know that fully, but I am grateful for it, beyond anything I can properly express." Wren looked at him for a long moment, the moonstone still warm and glowing in her palm, the sound of the pack's restored loyalty still echoing across the training yard around them. She thought of everything the past weeks had cost her, the sleepless nights, the careful investigations conducted in fear and uncertainty, the painful betrayal she had witnessed with her own eyes at the bottom of those cold stone stairs. "I will need time," she said finally, honestly, "before I can fully trust you again, Damien. The trial has restored the pack's bond, but it has not erased what happened between us. That will take longer to heal, if it heals at all." He nodded, accepting the answer, with a humility she had rarely seen from him before. "Whatever time you need," he said quietly. "I intend to earn back what I so carelessly put at risk, however long that takes." Genevieve approached slowly, as the celebration continued to swirl around them, stopping a respectful distance away. Her expression settled now into something Ren could only describe as genuine acceptance. "The stone chose well," she said simply. "Whatever else I am not foolish enough to argue with judgment, this ancient, or this clear." "What will you do now?" Ren asked, and found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she asked with genuine curiosity, rather than lingering hostility. "I do not yet know," Genevieve admitted. "Perhaps it is finally time I stopped trying to reclaim what my family lost generations ago, and simply built something new for myself instead, somewhere this particular history does not shadow every choice I make." Ren considered her for a long moment, the Moonstone's warmth still settling comfortably against her palm. "This pack could use warriors of your skill," she said finally, surprising herself with the offer. "If you are willing to serve it honestly, without the shadows of old grievances shaping every decision, there may yet be a place for you here, one earned rather than seized." Something shifted in Genevieve's expression, genuine surprise mixed with cautious, uncertain hope. "That is more generosity than I expected, Luna, given everything I have cost you." "I did not offer it easily," Ren admitted, "but I have learned, these past weeks, that this pack is stronger when its people are given the chance to prove themselves honestly, rather than simply punished for old wounds they did not choose to inherit." Nearby, Bertram and Alara stood together, watching the exchange, and Ren caught the older woman's soft, approving nod, a silent acknowledgement that the choice Ren had just made carried its own kind of wisdom, distinct from anything the ancient trial itself could have taught her. Ophelia, too, watched with quiet satisfaction, her weathered hands still resting on the velvet cushion that had, only minutes before, held the Moonstone in its uncertain, suspended judgment. "It will take time," Ophelia said, approaching to stand beside Ren, as the celebration continued to swirl around them, "before every member of this pack fully trusts the peace tonight has offered. Old fears do not vanish simply because the stone has spoken, but you have given them a foundation to build upon, Luna, which is more than many leaders manage to offer, even in far calmer times. Then we will build upon it together," Ren said, carefully and honestly, "for as long as it takes." As the celebration continued around them, warriors and elders alike offering their renewed loyalty, their relief plain upon every face, Ren stood at the center of the training yard, the Moonstone glowing softly in her hand, and felt, for the first time in weeks, something that resembled genuine peace settling over her exhausted heart. Whatever came next, whatever slow, careful work remained to fully rebuild the trust that had been broken these past difficult weeks, she understood now that she had faced the hardest test this pack's ancient traditions could offer, and had emerged from it not simply reclaimed, but transformed, into a Luna who had earned her place through her own courage and determination, rather than simply inherited it through circumstance alone. The moon hung full and bright above the training yard, bathing the celebrating pack in silver light, and Ren, standing at the very center of it all, finally allowed herself to breathe fully, deeply, for what felt like the first time in a very long while. 3 months later, a scream tore through the manor again, but this time it came from the healing hall, and this time it was followed almost immediately by the thin, furious cry of a newborn pup. Ren pressed her palm flat against the wall outside the healing hall doors, her heart pounding with an entirely different kind of fear than the one that had gripped her the night the Moonstone first disappeared from her nightstand. Beside her stood Alara, her silver hair now nearly white, her hand resting gently on Ren's shoulder in quiet, steady support. "You have come a long way from the frightened young woman who once sat beside me beneath that old oak tree, asking careful questions about jewelry and its meaning," Alara observed, a fond smile softening her weathered features. "I confess I did not expect, that first afternoon, that you would end up rewriting a piece of this pack's oldest history before the year was through." "I did not expect it either," Ren admitted. "I only knew I could not simply sit quietly and wait for someone else to decide my fate for me." "That distinction," Alara said, "has made all the difference, child. Not every Luna who has worn that title understood it so clearly. Some believed the title alone was enough to secure their place, without ever understanding that a pack's true loyalty must be earned fresh, again and again, through every difficult season a leader faces. Inside, Ophelia's voice rose in calm, practiced instruction, and moments later the door opened, to reveal the older woman's tired, delighted face. "A healthy girl, Luna," Ophelia said, "and a fierce one already, from the sound of her lungs." It was not Ren's own child, though she and Damien had spoken quietly, hopefully of that possibility in recent weeks. This particular pup belonged to Callum and his newly bonded mate, a young healer named Marielle who had joined the pack only months before. Ren had promised to be present for the birth, a small gesture of continued closeness with the young warrior who had stood so steadfastly beside her through the darkest weeks of her own crisis, and she felt her eyes sting with unexpected tears as she stepped into the room to meet the newest member of the royal pack. The 3 months since the trial of recognition had not been easy ones, though they had been, in their own difficult way, deeply healing. The pack's loyalty, once restored, had settled into something even steadier than before, as though the crisis itself, painful as it had been, had ultimately strengthened the bonds it once threatened to break entirely. Ren had thrown herself fully into the responsibilities of her role, no longer content to simply be presented at ceremonies and consulted on matters others deemed appropriate for her attention. She sat now at every council meeting, her voice carrying equal weight to Damien's own, her judgment sought and trusted in matters ranging from border security to the pack's care for its youngest and oldest members alike. Damien, for his part, had spent the months since the trial working to rebuild what his choices had so nearly destroyed. He had not simply apologized once and expected forgiveness to follow automatically. Instead, he had shown Ren, through countless small and consistent actions, that he understood the depth of what he had risked. He included her fully, in every decision now, however minor. He sought her counsel before acting, rather than after. He had, on more than one occasion, publicly credited her wisdom before the full council, a humility Ren suspected would have been unthinkable for the man he had been only a year before. Their marriage had not simply returned to what it once was. Ren had understood, in the raw, honest weeks following the trial, that she did not want it to. What existed between them now was something new, built on hard-won honesty rather than comfortable assumption, tested by betrayal, and painstakingly rebuilt through consistent, patient effort on both their parts. It was, she had come to believe, a stronger foundation than the one that had existed before, precisely because it had been forced to prove itself capable of surviving genuine crisis, rather than simply the easy comfort of untested devotion. Their marriage had not simply returned to what it once was. Ren had understood, in the raw, honest weeks following the trial, that she did not want it to. What existed between them now was something new, built on hard-won honesty, rather than comfortable assumption, tested by betrayal, and painstakingly rebuilt through consistent, patient effort on both their parts. It was, she had come to believe, a stronger foundation than the one that had existed before, precisely because it had been forced to prove itself capable of surviving genuine crisis, rather than simply the easy comfort of untested devotion. There had been difficult moments along the way, moments Ren did not shy away from remembering honestly, rather than smoothing over into a tidier version of events. There had been a night, roughly 6 weeks after the trial, when old fear had crept back into her chest, without warning, watching Damien speak too long and too warmly with a visiting dignitary from a neighboring pack, some deep, wounded part of her flinching at the memory of every careful, half-true explanation he had once offered her. She had told him honestly, rather than burying the fear, and he had listened without defensiveness, without the careful deflection that once characterized so many of their conversations, simply acknowledging the wound his choices had left, and promising, again, patiently, to keep proving himself trustworthy for as long as it took. It was not a single dramatic gesture that had rebuilt their bond, Ren had come to understand, but hundreds of small, consistent ones, repeated faithfully across the difficult weeks and months that followed the trial's dramatic resolution. Trust, she had learned, was rarely restored all at once. It accumulated slowly, patiently, one honest conversation at a time. Genevieve remained within the pack as well, though her role had shifted considerably since the night of the trial. She had taken Ren's offer seriously, dedicating herself fully to training the pack's younger warriors, her considerable skill finally channeled toward building, rather than accumulating personal influence. The two women had not become close friends exactly, the wounds of those difficult weeks too deep for easy familiarity, but a genuine, careful respect had grown steadily between them, evident in the way Genevieve now sought Ren's counsel on matters of pack strategy, and in the way Ren had come to value her honest, unflinching perspective on threats and challenges the pack still occasionally faced. Just the week before, Genevieve had approached Ren privately, her usual composure carrying a rare undertone of vulnerability. "I received word from a distant cousin," she said, "one of the few remaining members of my grandmother's original bloodline. She wishes to visit, to see what has become of the pack that once broke our family apart so completely." "Would you like her to come?" Ren had asked. "I believe I would," Genevieve admitted, "though I confess I do not entirely know what to say to her, about everything that has happened here, about the choices I made trying to reclaim something I never fully understood how to reclaim honestly." "Tell her the truth," Ren had suggested, "that the past cannot be undone, but that the present offers different choices than the ones her grandmother faced, that there is a place here now, if she wants it, built on earned trust rather than old grievance." Genevieve had studied her for a long moment, something like genuine gratitude settling into her composed features. "You are more generous than I deserve, Ren. I hope you know I do not take that generosity lightly." Standing now in the healing hall, watching Callum cradle his newborn daughter with an expression of pure, uncomplicated joy, Ren found herself thinking of that conversation, of how much had changed since the terrible night the Moonstone had first vanished from her nightstand. She thought of Isolde, the Luna from generations past, whose own trial had first shown her the path forward, and wondered whether that long-ago woman had found, in her own restored life, the same hard-won peace Ren now carried within her own heart. Later that evening, after the celebrations surrounding the new pup had settled into quiet, contented conversation among the gathered pack members, Ren found Damien waiting for her in the garden, where so much of her own private reckoning had once taken place. He held something small and carefully wrapped in soft cloth, offering it to her, with an expression of nervous hope she found, even now, quietly endearing. She unwrapped it carefully, and found within a small, delicately crafted pendant, a miniature replica of the Moonstone itself, though clearly a piece of jeweler's craft, rather than anything touched by ancient magic. "I had it made," Damien explained, "as a reminder, not to replace what the true Moonstone means to this pack, but as something smaller, more personal, between the two of us, a reminder of what we nearly lost, and what we chose, together, to rebuild." Ren held the small pendant carefully in her palm, feeling the weight of everything it represented settle gently rather than heavily against her heart. "It is beautiful," she said, and meant it fully. "Thank you." "I do not say this often enough," Damien said, taking her hand gently in his own, as the last light of evening faded into the soft glow of rising stars above them. "But I am endlessly grateful for the woman you have become through all of this, Ren. Not simply my mate, not simply this pack's Luna, but someone who fought fiercely and honestly for what she believed she deserved, even when doing so meant risking everything she had." Ren looked up at him, at the mountains rising dark and steady beyond the manor's walls, at the warm glow of lantern light spilling from the windows where her pack, her true and rightful pack, continued their quiet evening celebrations of new life and renewed trust. She thought of the frightened, uncertain woman who had once stood frozen outside a study door, listening to whispered voices that threatened to unravel everything she believed her life had become. That woman felt, now, like someone from a very different story entirely, someone who had not yet learned the fierce, unshakable strength that had carried her through betrayal, exile, and finally, triumphant restoration. "I fought for it," Ren said quietly, closing her fingers gently around the small pendant in her palm, "because I finally understood that some things are worth fighting for, no matter how frightening the fight, and no matter how uncertain the outcome might seem in its darkest moments." "I fought for it," Ren said quietly, closing her fingers gently around the small pendant in her palm, "because I finally understood that some things are worth fighting for, no matter how frightening the fight, and no matter how uncertain the outcome might seem in its darkest moments." Below them, in the training yard where the trial had once tested the truth of every claim laid before it, young pups born since that fateful night now played beneath the watchful eyes of their parents, oblivious to how close their futures had once come to unraveling entirely. Ren watched them for a long moment, small shapes tumbling and laughing in the lantern light, and felt a fierce, protective tenderness rise within her chest, a determination that whatever challenges the future still held for this pack, she would meet them, having already proven, to herself and to everyone who called this place home, that she would not simply retreat quietly when the truth of her own life demanded to be fought for. "Do you ever think of her?" Damien asked quietly, watching the same scene below them. "Isolde, the Luna, whose story led you to the trial in the first place." "Often," Ren admitted. "I wonder sometimes what became of her, after her own restoration. Whether she found the same peace I have found, or whether some scars simply remained with her always, however well the pack itself healed around her. Perhaps someday another Luna will read the record of your own trial," Damien offered, "and find, in your story, the same courage Isolde's story gave you." Ren considered that thought for a long moment, something quietly moving in the idea that her own difficult, painful journey might someday offer comfort or guidance to some future Luna facing her own uncertain crisis. "I hope she finds an easier path than I did," she said finally, "but if she does not, I hope she finds within herself the same stubborn refusal to simply disappear quietly that carried me through." Above them, the moon continued its patient, ancient journey across the star-scattered sky, the same moon that had once witnessed a trial generations past, the same moon that had watched over her own restoration only months before, and Ren, standing beside the man she had chosen to forgive, but never again to simply trust blindly, felt, for the first time in longer than she could clearly remember, entirely and completely at peace with the life she had fought so hard to reclaim. The royal pack, whole once more, settled into the quiet, contented rhythms of another ordinary evening, unaware of how close they had come to losing everything, grateful, in ways both spoken and unspoken, for the Luna who had refused to simply disappear quietly into the shadows when the truth of her own life had demanded, instead, to be fought for.